Section 1 of New Faces and Old, Short Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Caitlin Walsh. New Faces and Old, Short Stories by Francis J. Finn, S.J. A Point of Honor. Part 1. On commencement night, Harry Liscombe went forth from his home with a gay boutonniere in the lapel of his coat. His face was in keeping with the flowers. There was a bloom in his cheek, a brightness in his laughing eyes, and if he ever had experienced a care, time, like an absent-minded bookkeeper, had failed to enter it on his sunny features. There was just the least suspicion of a trip in Harry's buoyant step as he hastened along the street, whistling choice fragments from Sweet Marie, After the Ball, and another unspeakable melody of the day. Evidently, Harry was happy. To him the commencement exercises presented no terrors. He was quite sure of the prize in Latin, and looked forward with confidence to obtaining a second premium in 2 or 3 other branches. Moreover, he was now, and for the first time, arrayed in all the splendor of long pants. The time was well chosen. On the one hand, his smaller playmates would admire and envy him. On the other, as there was to be no class until September, his college friends would have no opportunity of teasing him on his changed appearance. No wonder, then, that he did not actually trip. A sense of dignity comes with long pants, which, though intense, is not lasting. Harry had gone some 4 squares when he turned into a quiet by-street, and going up the steps of a humble house, the third from the corner, rapped at the door. "Come in, Harry," cried a voice. "How did you know it was I?" asked Harry, as he opened the door and expanded into a smile. "I could tell your step in a procession. It's quick and light," answered the first speaker, a lad at least 2 years older than Harry, but slighter, paler, and far more serious-looking. "Good evening, Mrs. Stewart," continued Harry, bowing to the mother of his friend, who was seated close to a table-lamp, with a basket of needlework in her lap. Mrs. Stewart nodded pleasantly, and, after a few words, resumed her sewing. "Where's your buttonhole bouquet?" continued Harry. Dick Stewart shrugged his shoulders and asked, "Don't I look brilliant enough?" "You'll pass in a crowd, but as you and I are going to walk together, we'd better correspond." Harry, as he spoke, took from his pocket a little paper package, which he carefully unfolded. It contained a boutonniere like his own, and a fragrant red rose. "The rose is for you, Mrs. Stewart. I plucked it off father's nicest rose bush while the gardener was chasing a dog off our lot. I say, Mrs. Stewart," he added, while he presented her the flower, "you oughtn't sew at night. You'll hurt your eyes. My mother doesn't sew at night." "My eyes are quite good, thank you, Harry," said Mrs. Stewart with a smile. She did not think it worth while intimating that a doubtful income of $600 compared with a certain one of $10,000 made a considerable difference in the economy of a household. "Harry's right, Mother," put in Dick. "Your eyes aren't near so good as you make them out to be. Sometimes you hold your sewing machines, fixings, I mean, within 4 inches of your face. You oughtn't sew much at night anyhow. And then suppose, Mother, I get that scientific medal." Dick stopped short. Harry, he noticed, had given a sudden start. "But I mustn't count my chickens before they're hatched," he added, with an apologetic look directed at Harry. From that moment till they got out into the open air, Harry was unmistakably ill at ease. "Dick," he began, as arm in arm they stepped briskly forward, "do you think that your chances are good for that scientific medal?" "Well, if hard work counts for anything, I ought to stand a fair chance. I never worked for anything as I worked for that. Why, Harry, I've read 8 different books on the subject through, and took notes from all of them. In fact, I analyzed one of them from cover to cover. It cost me a month. I went over another of the books 3 times. Then I wrote out my essay 5 times, and I tell you, I was dead tired when I got through." "I should think you were. Good gracious, Dick, what put it into your head to work so hard?" Dick hesitated for a moment. "Well, I don't mind telling it to you, Harry, but you mustn't publish it. Last March I went to see a doctor, and he told me I was in danger of going into an incurable disease. He put me under treatment and a diet. Especially a diet." Dick uttered the last words with fervent disgust. "And said that if I could manage to go to Waukesha this summer and put myself under the charge of some doctor or other there, I can't remember his name, I might be permanently cured. Now, just 2 days before the doctor punched and pounded me, I got a letter from my uncle in Cincinnati, who's a very wealthy man, in which he offered to give me a full summer trip if I should win the scientific medal. My mother, you know, is very poor. Since Father's death 2 years ago, we've been trying to straighten our affairs, and we haven't managed to do so yet. Now, Harry, do you understand?" Did Harry understand? The light had gone from his eyes, the elasticity from his step, the flush from his cheek. He drew his handkerchief from his pocket to wipe the moisture from his hands. "Oh, how I hope you'll get it!" he cried in a burst of fervor, more intense than the occasion, and even his great friendship, might seem to warrant. Dick looked at Harry in surprise. "I believe you, Harry," he said, "but you needn't get so excited about it. You seem to be more anxious for my success than I am, and I've gone too far myself. The fact is, I'm getting selfish in this matter. I've got to be so anxious that I feel ashamed of myself, and of late I've been praying hard not to be too eager. But as eager as I am, Harry, just the same if I don't get it, I hope you may. In fact, I wouldn't worry a bit if you—" "Don't you talk any more of that nonsense! Don't you hope anything of the sort!" bawled Harry fiercely. "Why, old fellow, what in the world's the matter with you?" When this question was put, they were passing Holy Trinity Church. "Suppose we walk in here for a moment," said Harry, "and say a little prayer. First, that you may get the medal, and second, that I may not in any case." "I'll not agree to that," cried Dick warmly. "What do you take me for? I'll pray that either you or I may get it." "Look here, Dick Stewart," said Harry, catching his companion's arm in a grip that was painful, and lowering his voice to a whisper. "You and I have been partners these last 4 or 5 weeks, haven't we?" "Yes," assented Dick, struggling not to wince under Harry's grip. "And I like you better than any fellow I have ever met, and I believe you like me." "Better than any fellow I've ever met," broke in Dick. "Well, now, if you want to do me a favor, pray that I may not get that medal." "All right, Harry. That is, I won't pray that you may get it." "But you must." "Very well. But I fear I won't want to be heard. Anyhow, I don't understand." "I don't want you to understand," returned Harry, "but pray for all you're worth." The two entered the church. Part 2. The moment had come for which Dick had been so eagerly and Harry so anxiously waiting. They were seated next to each other, Dick's right hand clasped in Harry's left. "That's nearest my heart," Harry had said. "The gold medal for the scientific essay, subject Oxygen, is awarded to Henry Liscombe. Honorably mentioned, Richard Stewart." Harry uttered a gasp, which deepened into a groan. His face flushed scarlet. Dick's was ashen. "I'm glad you got it, Harry," he whispered. "It might have come hard on me, but our visit at Holy Trinity settled that. Why don't you go up?" "I can't," gasped Harry. Even then the vice president was running his eyes over the student to discover the whereabout of the prize winner. "Go on, you'll create a scene," urged Dick. "Is Harry Liscombe present?" the vice president inquired, so modulating his voice that it might reach only the students directly in front of the stage. Then Harry arose, and, amid generous applause, received the medal. But instead of returning to his seat, he made his way down the hall, and, once outside the door, dashed down the stairs and into the street, on reaching which his first act was to tear the medal from his coat. "Oh, what shall I do?" he cried out. "I'm a thief! And not only a thief, but I've robbed my dearest friend!" Part 3. 3 months before commencement, Harry had gone to his room in very bad humour. His father and he had had a slight misunderstanding, or, to put it better, they had come to an understanding. Harry, on that particular day, was for going to the circus. "Have you finished your scientific essay?" Mr. Liscombe asked. "No, father, I haven't begun it. The fact is, I don't care about competing." "Indeed? Why not?" "Oh, I don't care about it. I'm all right in my other studies, but I'm not up in science. Besides, I'm the youngest boy in the chemistry class, and I don't stand the least chance." "I'm sorry you don't care, Harry, but at the same time I do care. Very much. You are hardly a little boy now, and your not caring about this or that is only a pleasant way of saying that you're lazy. Now, my boy, I told you some months ago I wanted you to compete for that gold medal, and I thought my wish would be enough." "I intended to go in for it, father." "You always mean well, Harry, I'm sure, but you must do well, too. Now put the circus out of your head, go to your room, and begin your essay. The circus is to be here for a week yet. When you've finished your essay, come to me." Harry obeyed, but smarted under the obedience. Sitting down at his study table, he ran his fingers through his hair, took up a lead pencil, which he sharpened with elaborate care, and finally began his uncongenial task with such glittering generalities on oxygen as might be expected of a tolerably well-read lad of 15. Within 10 minutes he had composed quite a fair introduction, which, after the manner of youthful writers, was general, sweeping, and vague. Then Harry came to a pause. To go further, accurate knowledge must be brought into play. To get this accurate knowledge meant hours of study. Harry had come to an intellectual deadlock. He sighed, threw his pencil savagely upon the table, and began pacing the floor. His brow was furrowed, his hair stood up in a variety of directions. He looked like a student on the eve of some great discovery. As a matter of fact, his mind was a blank. "May I come in?" said a light voice without. "Yes, please do, Mary. I'm in the depths." His sister, a girl of 17, entered. "Why, Harry, what's happened? Is it an inspiration? Has an idea come to you?" "No, Mary, it's the other way. All my ideas have left me." "Oh, it's much the same. What's the trouble?" "Father says I've got to write that old scientific essay about oxygen. I've scribbled off an introduction, but I don't see how I can go a single sentence further." "Oh, is it about oxygen, Harry?" "Yes, it is, and I wish I'd never heard of the old stuff." "I've got just what you want. There's an old number of a scientific magazine in my room with a fine article on the air. Most of it's about oxygen." "You have? That'll save me hours of running through textbooks. Mary, you're the right kind of a sister." "Which means you want me to run off and get you the magazine." Harry grinned. I didn't intend to put it so... "Brutally?" suggested Mary. "Exactly, but if you bring it to me, I'll fix up that essay in a jiffy, and then I'll take you to the circus." Curiously enough, this young lady was not insensible to the charms of the circus. She hastened away and returned promptly with the coveted magazine, and then left her brother to his solitude. Harry read the article carefully, slapped his thigh at the end, and cried out, "Just the thing to a dot! It's short and clear." Having given the article a second reading, he composed himself to his work, and, not without labor, wrote a few sentences. But the words failed to come readily, and in a fit of impatience he began to copy word for word from the printed page. To do Harry justice, he was not thinking of securing the gold medal. His one point was to get the disagreeable task off his hands, and so go to the circus. Copying he found to be quite an easy matter. In a few hours he had, with some judicious and time-saving omissions, transferred the portion bearing upon oxygen for the magazine to his paper. Then he threw in a few cheap flourishes by way of conclusion, and signed his nom de plume. Strangely enough, his conscience, meantime, was practically asleep. It never occurred to him that his essay might gain the medal. In due time he handed it in. In due time he went with his sister to the circus. Of the latter he retained vivid recollections, but his essay slipped from his memory almost as though it had not been. Some 5 or 6 weeks before commencement, his intimacy with Dick Stewart began. Morally, Dick was a character strong and sweet. He was studious, conscientious, kind, just. In his company, Harry's dormant conscience soon began to show signs of an awakening. Dick's sense of honor communicated itself to Harry, and as the days went by, the voice of conscience became imperative. Finally, 2 weeks before the ending of the school year, Harry went to the vice-president. "Father," he said, "I should be obliged to you if you were to allow me to withdraw my scientific essay." The vice-president was unusually busy at the time. He failed to observe the distress in the boy's face. "Too late, Harry," he said, checking off the names of latecomers as he spoke. "Everything's been settled already." Harry withdrew with a lighter heart. He had done something, at any rate, and as to getting the medal, the thought had not as yet entered his head. But when on commencement night Dick Stewart gave word to his hopes and fears, it flashed upon Harry that his own borrowed essay would in all likelihood be considered the better of the two. It was a sickening moment. When the prize was awarded to him, his feelings were agonizing. A thief, robbing his best friend of honor so well earned, and in consequence of a trip upon which depended in all probability the usefulness of a promising and beautiful life. Harry hurried home from the hall, locked himself into his room, and gazed about him wildly. His eyes rested at last upon his little brother sleeping peacefully, his slender hands clasped above the white coverlid, the beads of the Blessed Virgin about his neck. Long and intently Harry gazed. There was not a line, nor wrinkle, nor shade of trouble upon the sleeper's face. Peace and purity and love seemed to have set their gracious signet marks upon every feature. He looked as an angel might look, were it to take human form. Truth and simplicity and innocence lent a spiritual beauty to the sleeping child. 3 years ago the gazer had been just such a one as his little brother. And how Harry burst into tears! The first passionate outbreak of grief was very soon over, but it left him upon his knees, and there he knelt far into the night. Part 4. On the next morning, Harry took his father aside. "Father, you intended to give me a trip east, didn't you?" "Yes, Harry. Your mother and sister are to start from New York on July 6th, and you are to go with them. You deserve a trip, my boy," he added kindly, and with a beaming smile. "No, father, I do not. I want you to let me off that trip." Mr. Liscombe looked sharply at his boy, and saw that there was great trouble upon him. "What's the matter, Harry?" "I've done something that I'm ashamed of, father. Don't ask me about it now. I'll tell you some day. First of all, I want to make reparation. I need money for that." There was a dimness in Harry's eyes, and as he spoke, a sigh broke from him which he could not repress. Mr. Liscombe had fine tact. He respected the soul of his boy. He knew there were recesses there where God alone might penetrate uninvited. "I trust you fully, Harry. You can tell me or not, as you please, and when you please." Harry never so loved his father as he loved him in this moment. He said nothing, but his silence was eloquent. "How much money do you want, Harry?" "It's a big sum, father." "First of all, I make you a present of the money your Eastern trip would have required. Say, $120. "Thank you, father, but I need about $80 more." "Very good. Call down at my office today, and it shall be paid to you in any way that you want it." "But, father, if you please, I should like to earn that $80. I've done wrong, and I'd like to do a little penance. Let me go to work." Mr. Liscombe paused before replying. "Well, I'd like to think over that. I want my boy to have a rest. I'll turn the matter over in my mind and let you know my conclusion later. Call for the money this afternoon, and then perhaps I may be ready to decide as to whether you should go to work or not." In the course of the hour, the president of St. Dunstan's College heard a knock at his door. "Come in," he cried, carefully slipping a sheet of paper over the open pages of a magazine, which he had been reading with knitted brows. "Ah, Harry," he exclaimed, "I was just thinking of you." "Father," said Harry, panting and blushing, "let me get it out at once. Here's that gold medal. I stole it. It isn't mine." "Sit down, Harry, and tell me about it." The American boy is delightfully frank. Harry, in truth, delivered a plain, unvarnished tale. "One question, Harry," said the president gently, on Harry's coming to a pause. "When you copied from this—" and here the president slipped away the paper and revealed the magazine, open at one of the pages from which Harry had copied. "Did you do so with the intention of winning the medal?" "No, sir," cried Harry. "But didn't it occur to you that you might win it?" "No, father. The only thing I had on my mind was to get that essay off and go to the circus." The president smiled. "Harry, you've taken a great weight off my mind. Just a moment ago I was tempted to judge you harshly. It shocked me to think that one whose name for honor stood so high should deliberately cheat for a prize. But your explanation takes away the worst feature, and your confession makes up for much. If you had copied with the intention of getting the medal, then you would indeed be a thief. But you had not even in a confused and obscure way such an intention." "That's true, father, but all the same I've done a great wrong. As a matter of fact, I have the honor which belongs to Dick Stewart. I can't make up for that." "No, you can never make up for that," said the president gravely, "and it is well that you should know it. I think, Harry, that God has been watching over you in a special way. Had you not gained the medal, your sense of honor would have been blunted. Had you gained it, but not over one who happens to be your best friend and to need it very much, you might have stifled your conscience and gone on in a path which certainly would not be the one which your father, a man of stainless honor, has followed. But now, on the very threshold of dishonor, you are driven back. Harry, you have reason to thank God. Show your thankfulness by resolving from now on never to do the least thing tainted with even the suspicion of dishonor." "I do resolve, sir," said Harry, very erect and very earnest. "I see it all. God has been very good to me. And now I'm going down to tell my father. I'll give him the whole story straight. Do, my boy, and I doubt not that out of this evil God will draw great good. Harry went away happy. His father took the matter as the President had taken it. He congratulated his son on his courage in confessing. Now, in regard to your working, Harry, continued Mr. Liscombe, I've come to the conclusion that you are right. You should make reparation. I already know all about Dick Stewart, and I happen to have the address of his rich uncle, who does business with me. And now I want you to write the uncle a confidential letter, confessing your fault and enclosing the $200. Oh, I see, cried Harry in delight. I am to get the uncle to give Dick the trip, just as if he had gained the medal, so Dick won't know I've anything to do with it. Exactly, and... But Mr. Liscombe paused. Harry had flown to a desk, seized paper and pen, and begun writing furiously. Oh, I say, father, what about that job? Cried Harry, stopping in the middle of the letter. It's Secret Service. What's that, sir? You're to go to Waukesha, too. Your work is to make Dick Stewart happy for 2 months. As Harry here spilled a bottle of ink over the desk, the conversation was interrupted. If you wish to express your happiness, go outside, continued Mr. Liscombe. Well, it's good work for you. You are a cheerful young man, and you have a knack for keeping young Stewart on the go, which no one else has. Your services will be as good as the doctor's, and since you have wronged a friend in one way, you must right him in another. Dick and Harry had a jolly time. Harry was as successful a nurse, I dare say, as ever accompanied a patient to Waukesha. Dick returned the picture of health, Harry returned the soul of honor. Dick is healthy and strong to this day, and Harry is, and I trust ever will be, a knight without fear and without reproach.
End of section
1.
Section 2 of New Faces and Old Short Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jonathan Jones. New Faces and Old Short Stories by Francis J. Finn, Society of Jesuits. Round Christmas Footlights. Part 1. The Story of David. Mr. Murdoch, the angel told me to tell you he can't come to rehearsal today because he's got a black eye. Go and get him anyhow, said Mr. Murdoch in decided tones. An angel with a black eye can announce the good tidings just as well as not. Tell him that the author of the play is here and is anxious to see the whole rehearsal. Harry Verdin, who had just delivered the angel's health bulletin, glanced curiously at the stranger, who, it appeared, was the playwright, and then sped away, skippingly, in quest of the recalcitrant angel, while the 4 remaining young gentlemen stared hard and artlessly at the blushing author. It was 3 days before Christmas. For several weeks Mr. Murdoch had been training 6 little lads of his class to perform a simple drama called The Meeting at Bethlehem. To understand the events which I propose to relate, some idea of the plot must be given. And this is the argument as it appeared on the programme. The play supposes that on the night of the Nativity the Babe of Bethlehem calls to his side not only the shepherds but also some innocent children. A Jewish lad and his lame brother, led by the mysterious influence of a star, have reached a spot near the stable at Bethlehem. The charmed stillness of the night, the songs of the angels in the midnight air, the apparition of Uriel, all combine to impress upon their minds that something divine has happened or is about to happen. This surmise is confirmed by 2 lads, one a Greek, the other a Roman, who have just come from the crib at Bethlehem, and who declare that they have just seen God in the form of an infant. Despite the incredulity of his 2 companions, Ariel, the young cripple, believes, makes an act of faith in the divinity of the child, and straightway leaps up cured. Presently, the hatred which the Jewish youth had thus far shown the Gentiles is dissipated, and urged on by the persuasions of the little Ariel, who seems to have caught at once the spirit of peace and goodwill which Christ newly born has brought to earth, the children effect a reconciliation and depart, at the message of the angel Uriel, to adore the Word incarnate. Dramatis Personae. The three Jewish boys, Benoni, played by Master Harry Verdin, Ariel by Clarence Collingwood, Manahan by George Ring, Uriel, an angel, played by David Reed, and the two Gentiles, Faustinus, played by Thomas Farrar, and Aristos by John Steele. Mr. Murdoch, the young scholastic who had undertaken the production of this play, was a character worthy of study. His influence over the boys, whether large or small, was extraordinary. The secret of this influence, it was hard to find. He was reticent, quiet, and it would seem most unobservant. He appeared to know little or nothing about his boys, and yet he frequently brought things to rights without seeming to know that anything had been wrong. To give an instance, early in the school year, Mr. Murdoch was explaining the formation of the Latin verb. There are 4 conjugations in Latin, he was saying. The first is determined by the fact that the present infinitive ends in "ar", as amar, to love. The second has the infinitive in "ere", long, as in delere, to destroy. The third has the infinitive in "er", short. Just then a giant firecracker exploded. There was a promise of great confusion as a dozen youths started from their seats. Mr. Murdoch's hand went out with a gesture which settled them all back again. As, he continued, still holding the gesture, exploder, to explode. And then the boys could not make up their minds as to whether the teacher had borrowed his example from the event or not. With their sharp, eager young eyes they scanned his face to see whether a laugh would be in order. But Mr. Murdoch's face could express anything or nothing as he pleased, and on this occasion it expressed nothing. Before they could resolve their doubts, the teacher went on with his remarks, and for 3 days after it was held by certain of the class that Mr. Murdoch had not noticed the explosion at all. Mr. Murdoch was a man of power. The young gentleman who had set off the firecracker, though mystified, was not crushed. He had been sent to college against his will, and he had made up his mind to make it unpleasant for his teacher. After the firecracker episode, he stuck the nib of a pen in his desk and, at convenient, and in his judgment safe intervals, extracted archaic music from it by flipping it with his thumbnail. The sound was clear and distinct, yet everyone was certain that Mr. Murdoch failed to hear it. Presently the musician gave up in disgust. Then he took from his pocket a tiny pillbox filled with the heads of matches, and with the circumspection characteristic of such youths, scattered them along the aisle between the rows of benches. And so, when recess time came, most of the boys went off with a report. During the hour after recess, this disorderly lad hummed at first like a bluebottle fly, but meeting with no attention, finally with a view to harmonic effects. His rendition of Annie Laurie, though defective in the matter of time, was, upon the whole, melodious. Everybody, apparently, said Mr. Murdoch, listened with wonder. By dinner time it was held as a probable opinion that Mr. Murdoch was losing his hearing. At noon, the young scapegrace, instead of going directly to the lunchroom, sauntered alone into the yard. His movements lacked the vivacity which should distinguish his tender age. There were two reasons for this lack of vivacity. First, he was debating whether Mr. Murdoch was preternaturally foolish or supernaturally wise. Secondly, "David," came a voice from a window looking out upon the yard, "why aren't you at lunch?" "Because, sir, I forgot to bring my lunch basket," which was the second reason for his lack of vivacity. "Come in here, David, I want to see you," continued Mr. Murdoch with a smile. With vivacity reduced to nil, David obeyed. "He's found me out," David soliloquized with a gloomy brow, "and now I'm going to catch it." "Come in, David. It's a lucky thing that I have some cakes and fruit today. I found them in my room when I came from class. Some friends left them here, but forgot to leave his name. Sit down and eat what you can, then take a rest and eat some more." David put himself on the defensive at once. I don't want anything, sir, thank you." "I hear, David," continued the professor, not seeming to notice the answer, "that your mamma is sick." "Yes, sir," said David, softening. What lad would not soften when he thinks of his mother? "She is down with fever." "I'm sorry. Tell her that I'm coming to see her as soon as I can make time. I met your mother at the beginning of the year, and I liked her. You see, David, she was so fond of you." "Thank you, sir," said David, softening still more, and becoming polite in spite of himself. "She often talks of you, sir." "And how is your little sister?" continued Mr. Murdoch. "Oh, first rate, sir. She sings all day." "Does she sing Annie Laurie?" Dave shot a look at Mr. Murdoch. There was nothing in the teacher's face but an expression of kindliest interest. "Yes, sir, she's always singing Scottish airs." "They are my favourite too," said Mr. Murdoch as he rummaged in his desk. "Here," he continued, "is a picture of St. Cecilia for Ella. Tell her that St. Cecilia is the patron of music." "Thank you, sir," said Dave with a bow. "And now, Dave, sit down and eat." Dave yielded this point. "How do you like going to school here?" continued Mr. Murdoch as Dave began with a huge orange. "I don't like it at all," answered Dave, determined to make another struggle against being carried away by this stream of kindness. "Don't you? Where did you go to school before you came here?" "To a public school, the Stoddard. I went there for 3 years, and I liked it, and I want to go back again." Dave finished his orange with a look of disgust, and taking up another, peeled it with tragic gloom upon his countenance. "I don't wonder that you want to go back," continued Mr. Murdoch. "If I were in your place, I suppose I should feel just the same way myself." Dave forgot to scowl as he stared at his teacher. "There are nice boys going to the Stoddard?" Mr. Murdoch added. "Oh, you bet there are," said Dave emphatically. "Precisely. And you've come to like them very much, and you don't care about being separated from your old playfellows." "That's just it," cried Dave with enthusiasm. "All my chums go to that school." "I don't blame you a bit for feeling bad, Dave. It's a sign that you have a good heart. If you were a cruel and selfish boy, you wouldn't mind, but if you wait for a while, you will find that there are some good boys going here. After a few months, you will have many friends, and then you won't mind, and you will be happy. And best of all, you'll please your mother, who is so anxious for you to attend school here." I didn't think of it that way," said Dave, attacking a third orange and smiling radiantly. "Try to think of it. And another thing, Dave, don't complain about school while your mother is ill. If she thinks that you are unhappy, she will be unhappy too. You see, she is such a fond mother. I'll not say another word till she's well. I say, these oranges are immense. Take another. Oh, I think I will. And he did. Then he turned to the apples. Oh, and finally consented to regale himself with a huge slice of fruit-cake. And now, Dave, said Mr. Murdoch, laying a hand on the lad's shoulder and walking with him to the door, and next time you go to the chapel, say a Hail Mary for me, please. That will more than pay me for this lunch. Dave went straight to the chapel, said the Hail Mary and many other prayers. It was the first time since coming to the college that he had paid such a visit. He prayed well, for he was softened and humbled. Dave was not a bad boy, but if he had been, I dare say he would have come away justified. Dave was conquered. He was also a very sick boy that night, but that has nothing to do with this story. Now, Dave was the angel with the black eye. Part 2. The Undress Rehearsal. The angel, holding one hand over his right eye, came clattering in with, "Where's the man who wrote this play?" The playwright almost blushed, as several tiny fingers were pointed at him. Why didn't you give me more to say?" demanded the angel with a conciliatory smile. "All you got to do," remarked Cecil Collingwood, cripple of the play, "is to try and look pretty, and it would be hard enough for you to do that." "What's the matter with your eye?" queried the author. "It's blacked. I got it in a football rush, but I made 5 yards on that eye, and the fellow who gave it to me didn't have any wind in him when I got off him." In his tones there was sorrow for the eye, triumph for the windlessness of its giver. The angel here took Cecil Collingwood aside and said, pointing with his crescent thumb at the author, "Gee, he doesn't look like a man that writes plays." "How do men look that write plays?" asked Cecil with interest. "Oh, they look different. Say, Mr. Murdoch, how do you expect a fellow to talk with a black eye?" "It's not impossible," said the trainer. "Some people use their eyes too much when they talk." "Say, Dave," whispered Cecil, reverting to the author, he looks amiable." I bet our teacher could write a better play if he wanted to," returned the angel. "What's the sense of one angel? I mean, our teacher would have turned out 50. The playwright, meantime, was watching the boys. He noticed that they divided into 2 groups. These groups changed constantly, and yet Harry Verdin and Tommy Farrow were never seen together. They were all lively youngsters, and rattled away, boy fashion, with the occasional interchange and pokes and digs and the throwing about of hats and caps. They were quite natural. At length the rehearsal was begun. Verdin, as Bernini, helped his crippled brother Ariel to a seat upon what was supposed to be a stone, and the two fell to talking of the strange and beautiful night. They had not gone far in the dialogue when Tommy Farrow seated himself beside the one spectator. "Say, mister," he began with a friendly smile, Are you going to write any more plays?" "Perhaps," was the modest answer. "Well, if you do, bring in a lot of Indians." "How are you getting along with this play?" "Pretty well. I'm the Roman youth, and I've got to come on and tell Verdin, the fellow that plays Bernini, that I have seen the infant Saviour born in a stable, and that he has come to bring peace, and I tell him that the babe is the Messiah. Verdin's an old Jew, you know, and, well, I won't believe. He hates me, because I'm a Roman, and when I offer to shake hands, he refuses, the old sheeny. After a while, his little brother Ariel, who is a pious little Jew, gets cured by a miracle, and then Bernini apologises to me for having been so rude, and we become friends. I don't like to act with Verdin." "Why?" "Oh, nothing." The angel now seated himself next to Tommy, and hinted that the play would not be near so dead if the writer had introduced a football game. "Where's that angel?" called out Mr. Murdoch from behind the scenes. "Come on here, angel, and do your part." The angel hopped up upon the stage, and with heavy and long strides advanced to the middle. Bernini, Ariel, and Manahan fell upon their knees. "Ah, Mr. Angel," cried kneeling Cecilwood, clasping his hands and turning his blue eyes first upon the angel and then seraphically toward heaven. "What a beautiful black eye you've got." "Behold," bellowed the angel, glaring savagely at Cecil, I bring you tidings of great joy. Stop your monkeying, will you, Cecil Collingwood, or it will be the worse for you. Say, Mr. Murdoch, I can't act with a black eye." "If there were angels like you in heaven," observed the unruffled trainer, "I shouldn't care about going there. Try that scene over. Take shorter and slower steps, and don't announce the joyful tidings as though you were preaching a sermon on hell." After 5 painful efforts, the angels succeeded in satisfying the patient Mr. Murdoch. The play now proceeded briskly, the quarrel scene between Verdin and Farrar being really good. But when the time of reconciliation arrived, the action became at once unsatisfactory. Manahan, it is true, and Aristos clasped hands cordially and with great naturalness. But Bernini and Faustinus did not shake hands at all. They made a feint. The hands drew close together, but there was no clasp. Their cordiality was congealed. "Mr. Murdoch," said the author, "this thing won't do at all. I mean, Farrar and Furring haven't the least idea of their parts. I mean, they've missed the spirit of it altogether." "Have they?" "Of course. Didn't you notice? They did not shake hands." "Didn't they?" You must have noticed it. I mean, that the reconciliation was the iciest thing I've ever witnessed." Mr. Murdoch paused for a moment. "Let it go for the present," he said. "I think it will be all right." The author went away, vexed. "I'm going to get a millstone," he muttered, "and I shall try to find out whether Mr. Murdoch can discover the hole." For he had seen at a glance that Verdin and Farrar were not on speaking terms. As a matter of fact, these two young gentlemen had not spoken in many months. Isn't it queer that Mr. Murdoch has never noticed the way those two fellows look at each other in different directions?" the angel had commented. There are some things Mr. Murdoch doesn't notice at all." But 2 rehearsals were remaining before the public performance, and yet Mr. Murdoch, despite the bad showing, went his way quite contentedly. How much did he know? There was no man who could have answered that question. Part 3. The Quarrel. Sing, O my muse, the wrath of Tommy Farrar against Harry, son of John Verdin, wholesale hardware merchant, which impeded the progress of the Christmas play and promised to set so many things awry. Leo XIII had a great deal to do with this quarrel. Shortly after Tommy Farrar was newly breeched, he was sent to the boys' department at St. Vincent's Academy, and seated next to his intimate friend Harry Verdin. They got on together nicely for some time. One day, however, in a burst of youthful vanity, Verdin said to Farrar, "You ought to go out west, then you'd be brave. I've been out west, and I've seen real Indians with their paint on." "Did they have tomahawks?" "Of course, and pipes of peace, and one of them shook hands with me. You never shook hands with an Indian. If you were to see a real live Indian, you'd run for your life." As Verdin was speaking, Farrar's face had lighted up. "Sure," he said. "Talk about shaking hands with an Indian. I've done better than that. I've kissed the Pope." "What?" cried Verdin. "That's just what. When I was about 4 years old, Mama and Papa took me to Europe. We went to see the Pope who lives there, and he was all in white and was smiling. Mama and Papa knelt down and kissed his slipper. Then Mama told me to kneel down too. I was only a baby, you know, and I didn't have any sense, and so I began to pout. Then Mama got red in the face and looked awful scared, especially when I said I won't kiss the Pope's toe. Then the Pope laughed and caught me in his arms and raised me to his face and kissed me. And then I kissed him back. And don't you forget it, Harry Verdin. I kissed the Pope back, and he looked so kind and good that when he set me down, I got on my knees on my own account and kissed both his toes. And Ma says that when I got up, the Pope blessed me with tears in his eyes. I mean, talk about shaking hands with an Indian. Verdin mastered his astonishment and said, Maybe it's as much to shake hands with an Indian as to kiss the Pope. What? Bawled Farrer. Harry Verdin, you're a heathen and a Republican. I'm as good a Catholic as you are. You're not. A boy who talks about Indians as if he were Pope, well, ought to be fired out of the church. I'm going to ask Sister about it. And Farrer rushed over to Sister Mary in great excitement. Sister, Harry Verdin says he'd rather shake hands with an Indian than kiss the Pope. I didn't say any such thing, spluttered Harry. I said maybe. Sister, which is right, pursued Farrer. Is it a greater privilege even to see the Pope than to shake hands with the greatest Indian chief on the plains? For the remainder of that year, Harry felt there was something wanting in his life. Oh, for a chance to kiss the Pope. Alas, his baby days were over. In the summer following, Harry went to Europe. He was gone for 2 months. On reaching home, he hastened at once to Tommy's house and burst into his friend's room in a glow of excitement. "How are you, Tommy?" he bawled as he caught Farrer's hand. I'm even with you now. I've been to Europe, and I kissed the Blarney Stone. Yeah, I mean, talk about kissing the Pope. I mean, kissing the Blarney Stone is out of sight." Tommy was so rejoiced to see his chum after the long separation that he allowed the question to pass for the present. But it came up again, in season and out of season. Tom and Harry gave some thought and much voice to their varying views, and, as commonly happens, the more they discussed the matter, the more each became fixed in his own opinion. One day they fell upon the vexed question in the presence of some of their schoolmates. Their auditors seemed to exercise an irritating influence. From words they came to blows, and when they were at length separated, Tom had a swollen lip and Harry a bleeding nose. From that day they went no more together, and when they chanced to meet, they passed on with averted faces. Many months had gone by. Together they went from school to college, and yet the breach was wide as ever. Then they found themselves obliged to face each other day after day in preparation for the Christmas performance. Part 4. Detected in Kindness. At 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve, Harry Verdin was seated at the supper table. Contrary to his custom, he ate with much deliberation. He gave a sigh of relief as his brother Louis left the table, another as his little sister followed suit. Then he looked wistfully at Alice, his senior by 2 years. She was dawdling according to her amiable wont, and evidently in no hurry. "I say, Alice," he at length remarked in a burst of inspiration, Did you see my costume for the play tomorrow night?" "No. Has it come?" asked Alice breathlessly. "It's a bird," said Harry solemnly. "I've spread it out on my bed, but as soon as I'm through my supper, I'm going to take it down to the college to put it—" There was no need of finishing the sentence. Alice had disappeared, and the sounds of a very hasty upstairs going were unmistakable. "Pa, Ma," began Harry impressively, "I'm going to confession right after supper." As his parents were prepared for this step, they evinced no surprise. And I'm going to turn over a new leaf," he added. "That's good, my dear," his mother observed. "I've been going wrong for a long time." Mr. and Mrs. Verdin looked at their son with awakening interest. The reason I'm telling you all this is because I want your help. I'm in a box. You see, it's this way. Tommy Farrer and I had a fight ever so long ago." "I remember the fact distinctly," said Mr. Verdin. "I can see your face now, as it looked after that quarrel, my dear," added the mother. Yes, there's something that you don't know. Ever since that fight, Tommy and I have not been on speaking terms." Mrs. Verdin looked meaningly at Mr. Verdin. His eyes were fixed upon the tablecloth. "That was wrong, Harry," said Mr. Verdin in a constrained voice. I guess so, sir, but I managed some way or other to keep my conscience a-going all the same till lately. You see, Tommy and I act together in this Christmas play where all the talk is about peace and goodwill and brotherly love. It says that Christ was born to draw us all together and to make us all brothers. Then there's a part where Tom and I have to shake hands and change from enemies to friends. We can't do that part a little bit. At first I didn't mind the play, but the more I practiced, the more I felt that if Christ came to bring peace and love, I was a pretty sort of Christian. The last few days I haven't felt as though I could go to communion unless I made up with Tommy. So I've got to do it. And I want you to help me." Mrs. Verdin rose from her place and kissed her boy. There was a suspicious film in her eyes. "Harry," said the father in tones at once soft and strange, "I shall be glad to help you in any way I can. It is wrong and sad for little boys to cherish spites." "It isn't spite exactly, I think, Papa. I still like Tom first rate, but I don't care about trying to make up. I'm ashamed to. Now, here's the way I'm going to get out of it. I want to make Tom a Christmas present. A silver watch would be just the thing. I mean, most of the fellows in our class have watches. I know from some of the other fellows that Tom is awful anxious to get one. He was expecting one all along this Christmas. The angel—" "I beg your pardon," put in Mr. Verdin. "I mean Dave Ked, you know, he plays an angel, and we call him by that nickname because he's so unlike an angel. Well, Dave told me that Tom was blue because his mother told him he couldn't get his watch just yet." Mr. Verdin took a roll of bills from his pocket and counted out a sum that made Harry's eyes dance. Harry took the money and disappeared. I mean, he should have made a speech of thanks, but the fact he did not. And yet neither father nor mother noticed the omission. "Oh, my dear," said Mrs. Verdin, "Harry has unwittingly read you a sermon." "I don't see that. With Harry and Tom, the whole cause of their quarrel was a bit of foolishness. But with Tommy's father and myself, it is a serious case, a matter of justice. I'm not going to pay that man's bills. According to my view, the debt is wholly his. He called me a swindler. I can't forget that." "But, dear, he has arguments on his side. He thinks you're in the wrong, and so do some of your best friends. Besides, even if he did call you a swindler, he he was very much excited, and you hinted that he, your lifelong friend, was a thief. So he is. Pretty near it, at least, according to my way of looking at it. At any rate, the thing has gone too far. Can't come down with any self-respect from the position I took. I know that he won't give in. So there's an end of it. Your case is much the same as Harry's then. I mean, Harry admitted that he couldn't bring himself to try to make up. It's a question of pride. You told me the other day that Mr. Farrer is now in financial difficulties. It will be a sad Christmas for him. His money is going, and he has lost his lifelong friend. It was his own fault, said Mr. Verdin in harsh tones. If it were not for our quarrel, I would help him in a minute. And yet, dear, said Mrs. Verdin in her most persuasive accents, you and he were such good friends, and you break up your friendship, all because of a beggarly $300. He is in distress now, John. It would be so magnanimous of you to make the first advances. Mr. Verdin took up the evening paper. You don't understand business, he remarked. Perhaps not. But I do understand that in most quarrels both parties are in the wrong. And I also know that when our Saviour came upon earth, he came to bring peace and love to businessmen too. Mr. Verdin was now deeply engrossed in his evening paper. The wife sighed, and there was no more to be said. An hour later, Harry Verdin, wrapped in an ulster which reached far below his knickerbockers, his head down in protection against biting wind and stinging sleet, and holding in his gloved right hand a tiny package, was making his way bravely and cheerfully towards Tommy Farrer's house. It was his intention to deliver to the servant at the door the package, carefully addressed to Tommy Farrer, with love from Harry, and then hurry away. As yet he dared not face Tom, but he could easily imagine Tommy's joy, and he revelled in the imagining thereof. I bet Tom and I will be friends for life, he soliloquized, and absorbed in this pleasant reflection, he sank his head lower and went forward at a still livelier gait. He was now upon the square, at the further end of which stood Mr. Farrer's house. The bracing walk had set his blood a-tingle. The prospect of Tommy's delight at the gift had put into him a moral glow. In short, despite settling darkness and bitter weather, Harry was walking in the golden sunshine of imagination. He was also walking upon a very slippery sidewalk. This thought occurred to him only when his feet went sliding in different directions. He tried to recover his balance unavailingly, lurched forward heavily, and then would have fallen had he not plunged into the arms of another youth. I beg your pardon, cried Harry, readjusting himself and anxiously putting the package to his ear. If you hadn't saved me, good, it's ticking. I might have... Here, Harry, having removed the package from his ear and taking a more accurate look at his preserver, started back dramatically. In front of him, his face mantled with blushes, stood Tommy Farrer, apparently dreadfully ashamed of himself. He was hugging a large envelope to his bosom in a way that made him look like a disconcerted chicken thief. Harry's ease of manner, too, it must be confessed, left much to be desired. As he stepped back, he swept the package into the pocket of his coat, while rosy signals manifested themselves on a face already aglow with a lively tramp. There was a moment of silence. I I was going to leave something at your house, said Harry at length, getting out each word as though it were a bucket in a well, but I didn't want you to see me, and I was going to post a card, a Christmas card to you, stuttered Tommy, but I didn't mean that you should know. Here it is. It isn't much, but it's the best I could do. And here's the package, Tommy, and we're friends, aren't we? Oh, Harry. And the two lads shook hands and said some words which would be unintelligible on paper. And now we'll be able to do our parts well, won't we? Said Harry. You can just bet, answered Tom. For the last week I've been worrying about our quarrel. That play set me thinking. It seemed to be preaching at me all the time. Same way with me, said Harry. And then yesterday, when Mr. Murdoch told us that the preparation we could make for bringing out the play well would be to get in the real spirit of love and peace which belongs to Christmas, I made up my mind that I'd have to go and ask your pardon. Same way with me, but Harry, and now I'm ready to go and make a stunning confession. So am I, Harry. Let's go off at once. Then arm in arm they went off to confession, and I doubt not that the angels rejoiced. Part 5. The Play's the Thing. Was it a bit of chance that Mr. Murdoch put Mr. Verdin on the corner seat to the right of the mayoral, and Mr. Farrer on the corner to the left, and both in the front row? At all events, it was awkward for these gentlemen, who, when their faces were not buried in their programmes, stared straight ahead. Behind the scenes, great humour prevailed. The actors now knew that Tom and Harry were reconciled, and having something of the angelic in them on this angelic day, they rejoiced exceedingly. Confidence was restored. Each felt the play was sure to succeed. All then went merrily as a marriage bell, till the angel produced a diversion by declaring that he would not be painted. You think I'm going to go out before these people wearing a gown and looking like a girl? Don't you believe it? He exclaimed in dignity. All angels wear gowns, said Clarence. Well, this angel wears a gown too, but he doesn't paint his cheeks no more than any other angel. When Mr. Murdoch came upon the group, the costumer was in the state of despair. At a word from his teacher, however, Dave consented to be painted. If you say so, I'll stand it, he growled, though I don't want to look any prettier than I am. Oh, exclaimed Clarence disdainfully, you needn't pretend you don't want to look pretty. It's looking like a girl that's bothering you. Then Clarence just succeeded in dodging the angel's shoe. The play opened well. Each little actor, full of the Christmas spirit, was unconsciously communicating it to the audience. Every word, every gesture was measured, but there was no measure to their play of feeling. The charm was unbroken till the angel appeared. Here, however, there seemed to be a collapse. The angel was to have glided out majestically, to have raised one graceful arm towards heaven, and in slow, solemn, silvery accents announced the glad tidings of our Saviour's birth. He departed considerably from his training. Coming out with a hurried step, he cast a wild glance at the audience, shrivelled up, as it were, and forgetting to raise his hand, in one breath, which was also breathless, made his little speech, and disappeared before the audience could fairly take in the situation. Mr. Murdoch, who was prompter, seemed to have foreseen the turn of events. Before the angel had finished his announcement, he sent out a special messenger to 12 trusty youths who he had stationed within easy reach. His message was simply, give the angel an encore. So, when David, in an agony of stage fright, had rushed off the stage, the applause was prolonged. In the midst of it, Mr. Murdoch obtained the angelic ear. "David," he said, "they want you back. Go out slowly, say your part deliberately, and you'll bring down the house." David flushed with pleasure. While the red lights were still glowing, he came back with solemn step upon the stage, lifted his arm, and delivered the glad tidings in so measured a tone that the whole house followed the speech with bated breath. His second appearance was entirely satisfactory, and, as he made not an ungraceful exit, the applause was sustained, and thus the threatened danger was averted. Defeat was changed into victory. For the moment the dialogue proceeded as though each speaker were inspired. The quarrel scene between Verdin as Bernini and Farrar as Faustinus was animated. At length the moment of reconciliation came, the moment so much dreaded by the author of the play. According to pre-arrangement, the two were to have clasped hands. This they did, and the author's sigh of relief was drowned in the murmur of satisfaction breathed by the audience. Of a sudden, Harry Verdin introduced a new feature. He threw his arms around Farrar. Tommy responded, and there they stood, actually hugging each other. Tom almost blubbered. The tears stood in Harry's eyes. It was a reconciliation such as is seldom witnessed upon any stage. No wonder the audience was carried away. Mr. Farrar, gazing rapt at the tableau, felt the tears rising to his eyes. He took out his handkerchief and was about to pass it over his face when a touch on his shoulder caused him to turn his head. Mr. Verdin was standing beside him, and his eyes looked watery too. "James," said Mr. Verdin, "our boys up there are teaching us a lesson, and I've learned it, old friend. Let's shake hands." While every man, woman, and child gazed in rapture and with applause upon the stage scene, these two hard men of business clasped hands with a warmth which gave promise that their enmity was gone forever. End of section 2.
Section number 3 of New Faces and Old, Short Stories. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by RMitchell. New Faces and Old. Short Stories by Francis J. Finn, S.J. The Reformation of Gussie Hooker. When Miss Harvey heard the loud slamming of 2 doors and the clatter as of iron-shod feet upon the corridor leading to her classroom, she knew that Master Tommy Playfair had returned from Chicago. Instinctively, she drew herself up in her chair, compressed her lips, and braced herself for the coming shock. Tommy had gone to Chicago with his father just before the opening of school, and for the first 2 weeks of class each day had seemed to Miss Harvey as a Sunday. A Sabbath calm pervaded her 20 little boys and 18 little girls. Miss Harvey was pleased to style their conduct angelic. But now, as the clatter drew near, she felt that the Sunday school days were over. "Where's Gussie Hooker?" bawled Tom, his voice entering the room a second or two before his chubby face appeared. "How do you do, Miss Harvey? I've had a great time, but I'm glad to get back. Where's Gussie? Oh, there he is in front. Say, Miss Harvey, can I sit next to him?" "You may not, Tommy," answered Miss Harvey, shaking the hand which Tom, while running his eyes over the class, was good enough to extend towards her. "You two together would create too much confusion. He is troublesome enough, and as for yourself, you seem to be more boisterous now after your trip than you were before you left for Chicago." Tom, during these remarks, was bestowing nods and smiles upon various friends. He appeared to pay no attention whatsoever to Miss Harvey. It does not follow, however, that he did not take in every word. One of the problems of life is to know when a youngster is not paying attention. "Look here, Miss Harvey," said Tom, bringing his mouth to her ear and sinking his voice to a confession whisper. "I promised Gussie's mother to take care of him. He needs care, you know. He's the hardest nut on our block, and I want to reform him. If you let me sit next to him, I'll do my best to behave." Tom made a swift reach for a fly on the table, missed him, and resumed his whisper. "You know, I don't like him any too much, but I like his mother. She's got sense. She doesn't kiss me every time I go to her house, the way some women do. She treats me like a boy and listens to me when I talk." "Well, Tom," said Miss Harvey, after a moment's consideration, "I think I can depend upon your word." "Yes, ma'am. I'll do my best to be quiet. If I don't, it will be because I forget." "You may sit with Gussie." Tom, for very joy, shook his tangled mane of black hair. His eyes sparkled, and his face relaxed into a smile of gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll stick to my word till Gussie is reformed." "And then?" queried the teacher. "Why, then we'll just start over again." And thus, with a firm but temporary purpose of amendment, he seated himself beside Gussie. "Did you have a good time in Chicago?" Gussie whispered, before Tom was well seated. "Shh!" hissed Tom, frowning horribly. "Ugh!" snarled Gussie. "You're setting up to be pious." Tom bit his lip. This was a hard saying. "You're afraid to talk," continued Gussie. "I'm not," growled Tom in a whisper which reached every ear distinctly, "and if you don't behave yourself better, I'll punch your head after school." Number 2. Gussie was just turned 11, but as regards depravity, he was far in advance of his years. He was not, like Tom, a wild boy. He was quiet, reserved, silent, and sulky. When aroused, his temper was decidedly ugly, and he was then wont to employ expressions which gentlemen shrink from with natural repugnance. His sense of honor, too, was low. A lie cost him nothing. Detection seldom brought a blush to his cheek. When one comes upon an American boy of this kind, one at once concludes that he has been shabbily treated. Lying and swearing are acquired vices for our boys. Gussie had been shabbily treated. Born of a Protestant mother, his father, a Catholic, had insisted upon the baby's baptism. Thus, as an infant, Gussie had entered the door of the church, but from the moment of entrance he had been allowed to sit upon the door-sill. His father was careless in the matter, and left him entirely to Mrs. Hooker. And, to do her justice, Mrs. Hooker did very well according to her lights. At 8, Gussie was a charming little lad, pretty, polite, cultured, according to the capacity of his youth, but without a touch of religious training. Then, in an evil hour, Miss Hooker sent her boy to a certain boarding school. It had many advantages. Board and tuition were high, consequently it was most exclusive. Some of the best St. Louis families had representatives there. Consequently, it was aristocratic. After 2 years at this academy, Gussie returned with a strong taste for cigarettes and profanity, and a decided facility for the distortion of facts. Then the eyes of his mother were opened. The father was vexed. He now insisted that his boy should get a Catholic training, humbled and submissive. Mrs. Hooker assented, and Gussie at once became a pupil of Miss Harvey's select school for boys. Gussie learned his catechism with ease. His memory, despite his habit of lying, was good, but when it came to carrying precept into practice, Gussie made it understood that he wished to be excused. He was an unlovely little boy at this period of his life, and I do not care about dwelling at any length upon his faults. Suffice it to say that he had never gone to confession, and could not be induced to go by all the eloquent pleadings of zealous Miss Harvey. Then Tom came upon the scene. 2 days after our young reformers returned, Gussie undertook to bring a mouse into class. It occurred to him that it would amuse the boys to see Miss Harvey mount a chair and place one trembling hand over a palpitating heart and look silly and helpless. While Gussie was biding his time to free the mouse, that little creature discovered a hole in his pocket and found its way deep down into the lining, where it began to tumble about, to the no small perplexity of the practical joker. "What's the matter?" whispered Tom. "My mouse got loose." Tom glanced with eager interest at the little furrows that rose and broke upon the lower fringe of Gussie's coat. At once 2 or 3 other boys noticed the phenomenon. There was a craning of necks and a fastening of eyes upon the curious jacket. Gussie flushed red with anger and confusion. Miss Harvey followed the direction of the general gaze and saw the unusual movement in the recesses of the jacket. "Gussie, what's the matter with your jacket?" "There's a cat in it, ma'am," answered Gussie promptly. Gussie had no sense of humor, so he wondered very much when the boys broke into a shout. "Why don't you tell her it's an elephant?" suggested Tom. "Gussie," repeated Miss Harvey, "try to think before you answer. Now, tell me the truth." "It's a frog I'm taming for my circus. Honor bright, Miss Harvey. I tied up his legs so that he couldn't hop about, but he got loose." Meanwhile, Tom, disgusted with his schoolmates' lying, resolved to put a stop to further variations from the truth. Also, he wanted to enjoy a little fun, so while Gussie was narrating the story of his imaginary bullfrog for his fictitious circus, Tom whipped out his knife, turned up the lower part of Gussie's jacket, cut a neat slit. If Miss Harvey did not stand upon a chair, it was not because her natural impulses failed to point in that direction. She held her ground, but turned quite pale, while 20 boys tumbled and pushed and stamped about the floor. I shall say nothing about the conduct of the girls on this occasion. It was only after the mouse had been knocked senseless by Tom Playfair, who carried it out swinging it jauntily by the tail, that Miss Harvey addressed herself to restoring order. It was capital fun, the boys thought. However, Tom and his charge had reason to change their opinion later in the day. They were required to stay after class and commit to memory 20 lines of Hamlet's soliloquy. "You had no business to slash my coat," remarked Gussie as he and Tom sat in the deserted classroom. "I did. It was a good action. It was virtuous," retorted Tom. "You see, I wanted to stop your lying. If I hadn't slit your coat, you'd have told more lies. You're the biggest fibber I know." "But look at my jacket," urged Gussie, taking no note of the brutal animadversions on his veracity. Tom glanced at the coat cheerfully. "You just go and get that coat mended and send the bill to my pa. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether... Now you keep quiet and stop fooling till I learn these lines. I want to go over to Charlie Mackey's yard. He's got a billy goat from Texas." "You ought to see that billy goat that was at our military school," Gussie observed. "Was he from Texas?" "No, he came from Greenland. He was bigger than my pony." "That's so." "Yes, and you can just believe he was strong. You ought to see him butt. I'll bet he couldn't beat a Texas billy." "Couldn't he now?" "Like fun he couldn't. I saw him knock a bull senseless with one lick." Tom arose, scooped some grains of chalk from the gutter that lined the blackboard, and said, "Take that back or I'll chalk your face." "It wasn't a bull, it was a cat," said Gussie. "You ought to wash your mouth out," said Tom disdainfully. "Say, Gussie," he continued in a milder tone, "I got a plan. Let's get off and go see the billy goat. You go to Miss Harvey and promise her you'll go to confession, and then she'll let you off and I'll get off too." "Oh, I'll promise," said Gussie. "That's easy. But you must mean it. You gotta go if you promise." "No, I haven't." "I'll bet you have, and I'll see that you go. Then, when you go, you've got to make up your mind to stop cursing and lying. You can't go to heaven if you don't." "I didn't ask to go to heaven." Here Gussie moved away rapidly. Tom had made another scoop for chalked dust. "Won't you go and promise," pursued Tom, "and mean what you say?" I don't intend to stop cursing. I can't help it when I'm mad, and I don't see so much harm in a lie. It gets a fellow out of lots of scrapes." Tom gazed at him in undisguised wonder. "Well," he said at length, "if you don't intend to make a promise that you mean, I shan't have anything to do with you." "I don't care," sulked Gussie. "All right," said Tom. "Just the same, that billy goat is a dandy." This strong praise from Tom set Gussie to reflecting. Presently he said, "Say, Tom, I don't care if I do make that promise to go to confession." "Honor bright? Cross my heart 3 times." Gussie, with much solemnity, suited the action to the word. "Well, I'll see to it that you go, if you promise." As Tom had anticipated, Miss Harvey was quite willing to let them off under the proposed terms. And so, Gussie Hooker has not learned Hamlet's soliloquy to this day. Arm in arm, the two tripped away, examined the billy goat very earnestly, and had, in short, a good time, somewhat marred and curtailed, it is true, but the fact that the goat, taking things as it were into his own hands, upset Tom, and put him and his companion to an ignominious fight. "Never mind," said Tom as he dusted himself off and examined a bruise on his hand. "I'll get even with that billy after I've seen you through your confession." "You needn't mind about that confession." "Needn't I? I just will all the same. Next Thursday after class, I'm going to bring you over to the church, and I'll stand behind you there till you go into the confession house and come out again. You've got to go through with it." Gussie snarled and muttered something to himself. After class on Thursday afternoon, there was a great commotion in front of Miss Harvey's select school. All the small boys were gathered in a semicircle about the fence, gazing upon 2 strugglers. One was holding with hands and feet to the iron railings. The other was tugging away in a desperate endeavor to get his adversary free of the fence. Beyond the crowd of boys stood nearly all the little girls, at a distance in keeping at once with their timidity and their curiosity. They gave frequent little shrieks of horror, and uttered loud exclamations of disapproval. In a word, they were enjoying the spectacle more than the boys themselves. The intelligent reader hardly needs to be told that Gussie Hooker was clinging to the fence, and that it was Tommy who was clinging to Gussie. And very red and disgusted and breathless Tommy was. Gussie himself was white with fear, and clung to the rails as a drowning man to a straw. Tom could not dislodge him. "Look here, Gussie Hooker," he flamed out. "If you don't come along, I'll thrash you and carry you all the way." Just then the girls started for their respective homes, with a sudden and striking loss of interest in the quarrel. Miss Harvey was approaching the scene of the trouble with all the haste consonant with her dignity. The boys were apprised of her coming by the utterance of a rude translation of "cave" from a youngster on the outskirts. They were too honest to give up all show of interest. Nevertheless, they drew back promptly to allow their teacher passageway. Little boys, she exclaimed. "What's this I see? Such a scene is disgraceful." "Yes, ma'am, that's just what it is," cried Tom, letting go his quarry and gesticulating at Miss Harvey, while the luckless Gussie continued to hug the fence. "You know the promise Gussie made you. Now he won't keep it, and I'm trying to bring him up to time. He's been mean, and I was tempted to lick him." "Go home, boys," said Miss Harvey to the interested crowd. As Miss Harvey turned toward the boys, there was a quick disappearance of skirts around the corner. "Tommy and Gussie," she continued, "come with me." Looking very flustered and bedraggled, the reformer and his charge followed Miss Harvey into the schoolhouse. The teacher had no little trouble in persuading Tom that in the matter of bringing a sinner to confession, moral force alone should be employed. Tom was at length convinced. The upshot of it all was that our hero succeeded in eliciting a promise from Gussie to go to confession on the following Thursday. They shook hands over it, and Gussie crossed his heart 3 times 3. "You'll help me, Tom?" "Of course. I know how it's done, and we'll get the thing up in style. I'm glad I didn't lick you. You're a sickly-looking sort of fellow, and look as if you'd die young." In saying this, Tom was not aware that he was repeating, in unscientific language, the words of Gussie's family doctor, one of the foremost physicians of St. Louis. Number 3. It was at this period of his dazzling career that Tom betrayed an extraordinary interest in arithmetic. Miss Harvey noticed with joy that he was busy at all odd moments of class with his slate. That he was figuring was clearly evident. He would, with many taps and scratches, jot a few figures upon his slate. Throwing down the pencil, he would sweep back his mane, cast his dark eyes not ecstatically but ruminatively toward the ceiling, and begin to mumble to himself. Then he would give his head a shake, lower his eyes, and start to counting on his fingers, which he held in front of his face. Generally, these proceedings ended in a growl. Gussie, meantime, watched Tom with vivid interest. The growl meant that Tom had gone beyond the range of his mathematical calculations. Reluctantly, he would leave his seat, go to Miss Harvey's desk, where something like the following conversation would ensue. "Miss Harvey, how many are 9 times 8? 72. Is it? I thought it was 64. You put down the 7 and carry the 2, don't you?" "Just the opposite. You put down the 2 and carry the 7. "It would be easier to carry the 2. That's the way with multiplication. They make everything hard." "It's not hard, Tom, if you study it properly." "But I am studying it, and it is hard. Say, I can catch you. 12 times 1 are 12, aren't they?" "Certainly." "And you carry the 1, don't you?" "Of course." "Now I've got you," cried Tom with a finger gesture which came within a little of injuring Miss Harvey's right eye. "If what you say is true, then 12 times 1 are 13. Miss Harvey looked astonished. "I'll prove it. 12 times 1 are 12 and carry 1. 12 and 1 carried make 13. Then Tom returned to his seat, smiling so intensely that one would think he had never suffered from the pangs of studying the multiplication table. At home, these were happy days for Aunt Meadow. After their early supper, Tom would take out his slate and arithmetic and declare his intentions of studying. The Playfair mansion had never come upon such peaceful days since the youthful son and heir, by a prodigious squall, announced his arrival into the world, of which he had ever since continued to be a noisy ornament. "Aunt," said Tom on the third night of his self-imposed studies, "is it a sin to smoke cigarettes?" "Not exactly, Tommy dear, but if your papa were to forbid you, it would be sinful to smoke them, because it would be an act of disobedience." "You needn't talk about me, Auntie. I gave up long ago," said the moralist of 8. "If your pa forbade you to smoke, and you were to go and smoke anyhow, it would be one sin of disobedience, wouldn't it?" "Yes, dear." "And if your pa and your ma were both to forbid you, it would be 2 sins, wouldn't it?" Then Miss Meadow had to explain that in regard to the child, the father and mother could be considered as one. Tom nodded intelligently. "Oh, maybe I won't catch Miss Harvey tomorrow. I'll prove to her that 2 times 1 are 1, and Tom fell to at his slate with fresh zeal. Miss Meadow, in passing by Tom, happened to let her eyes fall upon his slate. 18 cigarettes. These words stood out in bold and artless characters. Miss Meadow bent down and read, 18 cigarettes every day for 2 years equals 2 times 365 equals 730. 18 multiplied by 730 equals 13,140, which is the answer and the number he smoked." "Tommy, what in the world are you doing?" "It's a most solemn secret," answered Tom, with awe upon his face. "You didn't had ought to look. Don't speak to Uncle Meadow. Maybe I'll tell you some day." Had Tom been 60 and Secretary of State, he could not have been more dignified and solemn. For 3 days, then, he studied, and went about wrapped round in mystery. He was changed in everything except his appetite. That was unfailingly good. Gussie, too, was on his best behavior. He was quiet, studious, and particularly interested in his catechism. His thin, yellow, pinched little face on one occasion was all aglow when Miss Harvey spoke of the Saviour's love of little children. Did Christ love children my age? He asked. Yes, dear, answered Miss Harvey, quite moved by the earnest pathos of the sunken eyes. He loves all little children who try to be good. And then Tom wrote on his slate, and you're trying to be good like 40, Gussie. On Wednesday, there were several absentees. When Thursday came, the number was increased. Diphtheria had broken out with unusual virulence among the little ones of the West End of St. Louis. However, Gussie and Tom were on hand. Children, Miss Harvey said that afternoon, owing to special reasons concerning which I have informed your parents, there will be no school for a week or two. Notice will be sent you when we judge proper to reopen. Tom led the chorus of shouting which greeted this announcement, but he did not lose sight of Gussie, who, strange to say, betrayed little or no enthusiasm. Say, Gussie, have you got that paper all right that I gave you? He inquired as they came upon the street. No, I've burned it, but I know it by heart. I don't feel like going to confession. I've got a headache and feel bad all over. Don't mind, Gussie. The priest I'm going to bring you to is nice as pie. He's never cross, and you'll be done in a minute. And when you're done, you'll feel better. I always do. Maybe it will cure you. Well, I'm going to stick to my promise. Don't forget about your lying and curse words, continued Tom gravely. I've got everything fixed. You needn't be so scared, continued Tom. What makes you think I'm scared? You look pale. I feel pale, returned Gussie seriously, because I feel sick, but I'm not scared. Don't you believe it? They entered the church, Tom having supplied Gussie with his own prayer book and pointed out the proper prayers with an injunction to read 'em slow, stationed himself behind his penitent, and watched him vigilantly. After the lapse of 5 or 6 minutes, Tom arose from his knees, advanced to Gussie's side, and said, Have you made your act of contrition? Yes, whispered Gussie. And have you made up your mind to behave yourself properly? Yes. No more lying, no more cursing, continued Tom severely. Cross my heart, Tom. Then you'll do, concluded Tom coolly. Go right in now, and I'll wait for you. I have not the least doubt that Gussie made an excellent confession, though the confessor must have been astonished by its unconventionality. Gussie knew his catechism quite well, and Tom had thrown in his experience. The penitent came out a quarter of an hour later, very pale, but with a loveliness about his pinched features which was the loveliness of peace and wholesome sorrow. He threw himself on his knees, and, judging by exterior signs, gave himself up to the fervent prayer. Tom gazed upon his penitent with great complacency. Suddenly, Gussie slipped from the kneeling bench to the floor. Tom rushed to his side and essayed to lift him up. The noise brought out the priest. He gazed upon the pallid face as he lifted the child in his arms. It's a faint, he said. The boy looks really ill. It's his first confession, explained Tom. Oh, exclaimed the priest, that has happened before. The sacristan, in obedience to a signal given him by the confessor, now came up with some water. With but little trouble, Gussie was brought to. How do you feel, Gussie? Asked Tom. Happy, said Gussie feebly, with the long-lost loveliness of his early days in his face and smile. Are you able to walk? Asked the priest, setting him down gently. Oh, yes, Father, I'm all right now. I've often fainted before. My head feels awful light, but maybe that's because I'm happy. Well, my dear, you had best go home at once. You look ill. I'll take him home, sir, volunteered Tom. He's in my charge anyhow. Goodbye. The two left the church together. I feel pretty sick, began Gussie, but I don't mind. I'm going to make a new start, Tom. Gussie, said Tom, with a determination to show his love and approbation in one remark, I'm mighty glad I didn't lick you last Thursday. Both felt that the conversation was becoming sentimental, so Tom branched off to explaining a new method he had discovered of curving a ball. This topic lasted only until they reached Gussie's home. Why, my dear, what has happened to you? Cried Mrs. Hooker, as Tom and Gussie walked into her sitting room. He's sick, but he's been to confession, explained Tom. Yes, Mama, and I'm so glad I went. Tom made me. And I'm not going to disobey you any more, Mama, and I'm going to try to be like Tom. He's honest and square and doesn't tell lies, and he is the best ball player of his size in our school." "That's so, I guess," said Tom. Then Gussie kissed his mother with unusual affection. As she held him to her bosom, she noticed the sweet, calm look in his eyes, and her own filled with tears. She strained him to her breast. "Ah, my little dear, I feel like going to confession myself," said the Protestant mother. "I'll prepare you, ma'am," said Tom cheerfully. As Mrs. Hooker released Gussie, the little fellow staggered and would have fallen. The mother caught him again, gazed intently at his face, and then a startled look came upon her. "Goodbye, Tom. You must go at once. My little boy, I fear, is very, very sick." "Goodbye, Gussie," said Tom. "Goodbye, Tom," said Gussie in a low voice. "Goodbye." He held out a little hand, which Tom took in his, returning pressure for pressure. When Tom saw Gussie again, the eyes were closed, and a crucifix was between the motionless fingers. Pure white lilies made the room fragrant and beautiful. Upon the set face was a beauty and a calm and an innocence that suggested infinite loveliness. That beauty and calm and innocence did not belong to the boy Tom had known 2 weeks before, but they belonged to him forever now, thanks to the precious blood of Jesus, for they had been restored by sacramental power. End of section number 3. Read by RMitchell, New York City, November 7th, 2022.
Section 4 of New Faces and Old, Short Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jonathan Jones. New Faces and Old. Short Stories by Francis J. Finn, S.J. The Brothers. The fumes of incense followed the 2 acolytes as they went from the chapel into the courtyard of the monastery. The fumes of incense and the fervent Gregorian chant of the monks at vespers. The night was well on. A few stars and 1 bright planet shone from the misty sky. Here and there, the glimmer of a light from the cells threw into relief the long black shadows of the monastery. As the lads, arm in arm, walked slowly onward in the path of light which streamed from the open chapel door, their every feature stood out clear-cut and distinct from the darkness that walled them around. And very beautiful features they were, for upon them were written in the characters which nature employs in her most gracious moments, sweetness, winningness, modesty, and, most striking of all, that lovely expression of innocence which not only does not know, but which will not know evil. The 2 boys were very delicate and slender. Their long dark hair and black eyelashes emphasized the pallor of their cheeks and their large serious eyes. They were orphans, and, as could be seen at a glance, brothers. 4 years ago their father and mother had died, the one within a few weeks of the other, leaving them under the guardianship of their uncle, Father Bernard, the prior of the monastery. And indeed Father Bernard had acquitted himself well of his task. They had grown in the very shadow of the tabernacle which, very early, they had learned to love. There reposed the dear infant Jesus, had their mother told them years before, and when they were little prattlers of 3 and 5 years, had asked further about the dear infant Jesus, she told them the sweet story which St. Luke has given us. And as they listened, their little hearts were warmed into love which had never grown cold from their baby days, and their tender, open imaginations — what poet's imagination is as open as a child's — had been touched into an elevation and purity which promised to endure through life. And now, as they were pacing up and down the courtyard, John, the elder, said, "Harry, it's only a few hours from midnight, and then it is Christmas. I wonder whether the night when the dear infant Jesus was born was like this. I fancy it must have been clearer." "I was thinking about it all during benediction," rejoined Harry. "And then I got to looking at the sacred host just over my head, and I began to think how nice it would be if I could only see him as he used to be when he was a little boy, like myself. Wouldn't you like to see him? Just once, John?" "Mamma sees him all the time," said the elder brother softly. "Yes, and she sees us too," Harry added. "I try to remember it always, and I feel so glad to think that she is watching me." "Why, Harry?" "Because I always try to think as if Mamma were looking at my thoughts, and I know she must be pleased when God lets her see my thoughts. Oh, listen, isn't it beautiful?" He paused as he spoke, and turned his face, lighted up with appreciation, toward the chapel door. "How nice the Magnificat sounds tonight. It never sounded so beautiful before." "And his mercies on them that fear him throughout all generations." It was a fervent burst of triumphant chords. "It does sound strangely beautiful," assented John in a whisper which grudged the loss of a single chord or word. "But after all, it is natural. All these holy men are thinking of the dear little infant. How I should like to hear them sing the Benedictus too. It is nothing but a song in honour of the dear infant Jesus." And now, with faces turned towards the chapel, they listened eagerly while the glad canticle rolled forth in a full chorded swell of harmony. And while they listened, their pallid faces flushed for very joy, and their hearts were lifted and attuned to lofty prayer. For they were listening to strains which combined, in almost perfect proportion, lofty music and sublime words with the fervour of simple faith. "He, remembering his mercy, hath opened his servant Israel." "If it sounds so beautiful on earth, what must it be in heaven?" murmured Harry. As they stood in rapt attention, there appeared at the door of the chapel the form of a child. The light seemed to fall full upon his features. He stood facing them for a moment, and then came forward toward them with noiseless steps. But even as he stood at the sill of the chapel door, the two brothers had an opportunity of scrutinizing his features. Like theirs, his hair was long. Unlike theirs, it was very fair in colour, and sparkled in the light as though it were shot with gold. His eyes were large and full of tenderness. His features were singularly delicate and marked with a strange beauty. As he advanced towards the brothers, there was a smile, tender and subdued, upon his face, a smile the like of which the two lads had never seen before. The child was a stranger to them, and yet, when they caught that smile, they felt they were meeting a dear friend. "Welcome, little boy," said John. "I am John, and this is my brother Harry." With a gesture of winning grace, the newcomer took the eagerly extended hands of the two brothers and pressed them gently to his bosom. Again he smiled. You look like my mother," said Harry, gazing frankly into the blue eyes that met his in a glance of love. "So you do," added John, "only she was dark, and you are fair. But it is the look. When Mother used to tell us of the dear little infant, her face looked so like yours. Tell us your name, little friend." "Call me little brother, my brothers," answered the child, in a voice so musical that at its sound all that was lovely and exquisite in the thoughts and memories of Harry and John, seemed to vibrate in answering harmony. "You shall be our brother from now on, little friend," said John. "Shall he not, Harry?" "Yes," assented Harry. "We like you to be with us. John and I, before you came, we were listening to the singing of the Magnificat, and it made us feel so happy. But now that you are with us, I feel 1,000 times happier than I did when I was listening to the song. So you must be our brother. It is easy for us to think it, for you look so like our dear mother. And now, little brother, do you know anything about Christmas?" "It is the day I love," answered the child. "Then you must talk to us about it," said John. Tell us the story of the birth of the dear little Jesus," added Harry eagerly, "and be sure to bring in the angels." Walking between them and holding each by the hand, little brother began to speak, and the wind which had been sighing fell as though it were pausing to listen. Even their mother had never spoken as the child spoke, and while they listened, Harry and John caught such harmony, faint and low, from on high, that they were awed and enraptured. Little brother told the sweet story, the old story, as though he himself had been an eyewitness. Falling from his lips, there was about it a strange, mystic, indefinable charm. And all the while those strange harmonies, low and faint and sweet, dropped down all but spent from the misty heaven. Presently the child ceased to speak, and as though it had been a preconcerted signal, every bell in the monastery broke into a gladsome chiming. A strange light burst through the floor of heaven, and from the chapel came the voices of the monks, solemn but jubilant, singing the Adeste Fidelis. And as they concluded the stanza with Venite Adoram Dominum, the light in the heavens seemed to spring and shiver and glow as though it were a living thing, till in a few seconds the whole sky was glorious. And then, in a full burst of harmony, there fell upon the ears of these lads the songs of angels, music such as the great masters had never imagined. The heavenly strain was short-lived. It ceased as suddenly as it had begun. The diffused light gathered itself together into one point, disappeared, and in the silence and night that succeeded, little brother stood gazing on his transfixed companions. "Oh, thank you, cried John. "There was never anything like it since the first Christmas. Come with us now, little brother, and we shall visit the dear little Jesus." As they went towards the chapel, their strange visitor said, "I must go away soon." "Then we shall go with you," cried John. "No, my brothers, not yet. Whither I go, you cannot go." "Yes, we can," said Harry confidently. "We know that where you are, everything will be as it should be, and so we want to go too." "But very soon you are to serve the Christmas masses of Father Bernard." "That is true," assented Harry, and we would not miss those masses for anything, but after that you must come for us, and then we shall go home with you." The child smiled and said, "Yes, tomorrow I shall return, and then you shall come home with me." They entered the chapel and fell upon their knees in a prayer that was ecstasy. An hour had passed when a trembling hand touched the kneeling brothers. They turned and saw the aged prior, but the child had disappeared. On tiptoe, obedient to the prior's signal, they left the chapel. "My little ones," he said reprovingly, "you should have been in bed this long time." "Ah, but if you had heard the way our little brother told us Mamma's story," said Harry, "you would have felt like praying forever. It was beautiful." "Yes, but it was unkind of our little brother to slip away," John added. "Besides, he promised to take us home with him tomorrow." "Of whom are you talking?" asked the prior. The brothers told their story with animation and eagerness. The prior listened very silently. "And now," he said when they come to an end, "tell us the story of the dear little Jesus in the way your little brother told it." Suddenly the brothers looked at each other in great perplexity. "Isn't it strange?" exclaimed John. "It was all so beautiful, and now I cannot think of one word that he said." "Nor I," said Harry. "And then all that music, it was so nice and so easy, and now I can't even imagine how it sounded." The prior's face had grown very serious. He looked at his nephews with reverence and awe. "My dear little ones," he said after a moment's thought, "did your new little brother promise to take you to his home tomorrow?" "Yes, father," cried both in chorus. The prior paused again. A strange light came into his eyes. "Oh, my God," he exclaimed, "can it be? My children, I desire to go home with your little brother too." "You shall go, father," said Harry. "But you must get his permission." "Oh, we'll make him let you come along," said Harry confidently. "We can do just what we please with him." "That's true," assented John. "I can't imagine him refusing us anything. He is so good." "Well then, my little ones, you may go back to the chapel and ask the dear infant to induce your little brother to take me home too."
"Oh, thank you, father," cried Harry. "And may we stay up as long as we like?" asked John.
"Yes, my dears. I do not think you will need much sleep tonight. And tomorrow at Mass, remember, when you go to Holy Communion, to pray that I may go away with you." The prior and his two acolytes had re-entered the sacristy at the end of the Christmas Masses.
"How happy I shall be," whispered Harry to John, "if our little brother would come now. He ought to be here by this time. I think I shall scold him when he comes."
"Perhaps he is waiting for us in the chapel," suggested John. Harry walked to the door and then looked out, and even as he looked, a great joy lighted up his wan features. Near stride, his brother was beside him.
"Oh, father," cried Harry, there is little brother standing on the altar and beckoning us. He ought not to stand on the altar, though."
The aged father tottered to the door, gave one look and cried, "Kneel, my children, kneel. It is the dear little infant himself." They fell upon their knees in sudden awe, and as they knelt, the child glided to their side and whispered in the ear of each. And as each one heard the message, his face shone with the light of heaven. Again the child went to each of the kneeling group and pressed each head to his bosom. When the sacristan came at early dawn, he saw the three figures bent in seeming adoration before the tabernacle. On coming nearer, though, and examining their irresponsive faces, he was much frightened, for he did not know that little brother had taken them to his home. End of section 4. Section 5 of New Faces and Old Short Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jonathan Jones. New Faces and Old. Short Stories by Francis J. Finn, S.J. The Casuistry of Thomas Playfair. Thomas Playfair, chubby, rubicund, was unusually cheerful after his fourth confession, he experienced a spiritual consolation which was inclined to show itself exteriorly in the breaking of things. However, as he walked homeward, there happened to be nothing breakable convenient, so Tom was fain to content himself with drawing a stick rapidly along the iron rods of a fence. His fullness of happiness, however, was tempered by regret for his drum at home. Tom, you may be sure, had made a good confession, and he had resolved, among other things, to avoid fighting. Such a promise at this interesting period of his life meant much. As it happened, it meant a great deal on this very occasion. One square beyond the church, and in a very unfashionable quarter, stood a saloon, fronted at the edge of the sidewalk by a large watering trough. Beside this trough, as Tom came near, were several very dirty little boys, prominent among whom, for dirt and size, was an urchin, dark-eyed, black-haired, unwashed. This youth had been knocking his followers about quite freely. His fists were clenched, his scanty shirt was open at the throat, and he was breathing heavily. Two others of the group were rather the worse for battle. Tom paused. If I try to pass that fellow, he reflected, just as like as not he'll want to fight. I've heard about him. Anyhow, he's not more than my size, and... At this stage of his thought, Tom shook his head violently. Here he had been actually planning a fight. I think I'd better turn and go the other way, he continued to himself, as he slackened his pace. Now it so happened that the young bully perceived Tom's hesitation. Instantly the fire of battle flashed from his eyes, and he bawled out, "Hello, dandy!" Poor Tom. To turn now would seem to be a confession of cowardice. To go on? Yes, Tom would go on, but he would not fight in any event. The youth met him halfway, advancing with doubled fists and a strut which would have passed muster in the Bowery. "For 2 cents, I'll knock your head off." Tom was anxious, but collected. He put his hand in his pocket, drew out a nickel, and said, "Here's 5 cents, not to do it." The bully took the 5-cent piece, while a tide of emotion bore down upon him. For the moment he was dumbfounded, while Tom passed on, demure, serene, and all the world, well, that is, the youngsters by the water trough, wondered. On coming to himself, the young swashbuckler pocketed the nickel, then gave a yell and made after Tom with intention which could not be misunderstood. And Tom took to his heels. This, I believe, was the beginning of his career as a hero. He ran well, too, and reached home panting, breathless, and it must be confessed in a very uncomfortable frame of mind. "He'll be on the lookout for me again," Tom muttered to himself, "and it won't do to keep running away all the time. It's too hard, and besides it'll make things worse. All those fellows will want to fight me. I wish I could see my way out. I won't fight, anyhow, and if I don't fight, I'll have to fight. It's a conundrum." Then Tom went out to a sand pile in the street, and there enjoyed himself in the artless fashion peculiar to boys of his tender age. Meanwhile his mind sustained a process of hard thinking. Suddenly hands and feet sent the sand flying in the air, and Tom, with a happy smile, dashed into the house. He came out presently, giving evidence in his improved appearance of having bestowed unusual attention upon his person. One hand was in his jacket pocket, the other, as he walked, described 3/4 circles in the air. There was no hesitation in his step now, as he retraced at a dignified walk the path of his recent flight. "Immense," he muttered as he came in sight of the saloon and perceived the group still lingering beside the horse trough. The young bully seemed to look upon the situation in the same light. He whispered a few words to his admirers, and putting his arms akimbo, stationed himself midway on the pavement. Tom, ineffably serene, continued to advance. "Have you come to fight?" called out the bully. "No," answered Tom affably. "It's against my precepts to fight." The word precepts had occurred in Tom's last catechism lesson. It was the nearest word to principles that suggested itself. "I'll knock your head off," continued the street boy, still keeping his arms akimbo. Tom came on with steady pace until he was within a yard of the enemy. Then, quick as a flash, out from the pocket came the hand clasping a bar of soap. At the same instant, Tom threw his arm about the boy, and with one sudden and vigorous swing had his head in the trough. There was gurgling, a coughing, a quick motion up and down of the hand that held the soap, a few lusty kicks upon Tom's insensible shins, and presently the face came up, clean, dripping, terrified, awe-stricken. That face had never thus been treated within its owner's memory. The few kicks which he had distributed upon Tom's legs at first were the beginning and the end of his resistance. The washing had acted upon him as blinders upon a horse. His following was standing at a safe distance. "There now," panted Tom. "I've given your face a good washing. It needed it. It was virtuous to wash it. Next time you bother me, I'll wash your neck too." With which horrible threat on his lips, Tom walked away unmolested. Tom was not bothered again. He went away, taking himself quite seriously. Perhaps the angels were amused at Tom's solution. Of that I am not certain, but I am convinced at any rate that his application of soap upon the young bully was imputed to him in the celestial chancery unto justice. End of section 5.
Section 6 of New Faces and Old, Short Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ruth Maston. New Faces and Old, Short Stories by Francis J. Finn, S.J., Section 6. One of Claude Lightfoot's birthdays. The first rosy tints of dawn were glowing in the east when a very small boy bounded from his bed and danced into his clothes. The little lad's eyes were dancing too, and his cheeks were flushed very prettily, like the skies upon which his window looked out. No wonder the boy danced, no wonder his cheeks were flushed as a red, red rose. Claude Lightfoot, even on ordinary occasions, could scarcely help dancing, and his face was, at all times, prettily aglow. But on this promising morning there was a rosier glow on his cheek, an accelerated liveliness in the dance. In a word, it was Claude's 11th birthday, and, happy boy, he was about to undertake his first fishing expedition. The room in which he danced fronted on Pewaukee Lake, the waters of which were rippling in the morning breeze, and carrying upon their surface signals, crimson and gold, of the coming sunrise. The night before, an elaborate program for the next day's fishing expedition had been sketched out by Mr. Lightfoot. The party, consisting of Claude's father and mother and sister Kate, was to take a boat at 9, row forthwith to Thomas Island, establish their camping grounds on that beautiful spot, lunch at 11, dine at 1, sup at 6, then, at sundown, return to the villa of their host, Mr. Morrison. This plan was carefully thought out. Not a detail, Mr. Lightfoot flattered himself, had been overlooked, and yet there was an element of uncertainty in the whole matter. That element of uncertainty was Master Claude Lightfoot himself. His mother thought him an angel. If she were correct in her opinion, he was a very restless and reckless angel indeed. So restless and reckless that at this stage of his sunny career he was known by all his neighbors under the striking and alliterative title of Calamity Claude. There was some foundation for this name. At the age of 6, he had built a fire under the back porch of his father's house in order to roast a potato which he had cajoled of a passing vegetable man. The potato was roasted to a crisp, and the fire department deserved well of the city and of Mr. Lightfoot for saving the house from total destruction. The roasting of that potato cost Claude's father several $100s. The child refrained from kindling fires thereafter, but soon hit upon an excellent substitute for this forbidden pleasure. He contrived to be present, and very much in evidence indeed, at all conflagrations within a radius of 1 or 2 miles, in such wise that when the neighbors saw a little fellow with long golden hair streaming to the winds come dancing along and shouting "Hi, hi!" at the top of his treble pipe, they would say, "There goes Calamity Claude. I wonder whose house is burning this time." Some people went so far as to assert that Claude reached the scene of the fire before the hose carriage. This was an exaggeration. One day, it came about that by some wonderful contriving and twisting, Claude succeeded in dancing full into the path of a powerful stream from a hose. A burly fireman picked him up, carried him home, where, despite his protest, he was put to bed and, despite his tears, kept there for 8 hours of broad daylight. To make matters worse, Mr. Lightfoot strictly forbade him to go to any more fires unattended. Claude obeyed, and at once sought out other fields for the play of his untiring activities. The prohibition, as it happened, had been given him on the 2nd day of July. The 4th of the same month witnessed the temporary obliteration of his beautiful arched eyebrows and the partial disappearance of his long silken eyelashes. He was like the sun shorn of its beams. Claude had brought about this change in a very simple way. He had put a lighted match to a handful of powder, stooping over, at the same time, to take a more accurate survey of the result. Before Claude's eyebrows had been quite restored, he broke his arm in an attempt to balance himself on the back of a chair. To Mrs. Lightfoot, it is hardly necessary to say Claude was a subject of much anxiety. When he was away from home, the fond mother would pass in review every calamity possible that might happen to her little darling. At any unusual stir without, she would rush to the window, fearing that Claude was being brought back disfigured, maimed, or dead. A few days after he had broken his arm, Mrs. Lightfoot, standing beside his bed, was contemplating the happy features of her sleeping child. He was scarce 7, she reflected, and still within this small compass of years he had gone into numerous adventures and, on several occasions, simply come off with his life. What might not the future bring? Her eyes, as she reflected, chanced to rest upon a picture hanging over Claude's bed, Clockhurst's Our Guardian Angel. A gracious spirit stood watch and ward over 2 children. One, a little girl reaching for a flower on the edge of a precipice. The other, a bright, happy lad, so like her own Claude, stepping forward to catch a butterfly. That step, if taken, would plunge him over the brink. With his eyes on the butterfly, the child was unaware of his danger. Yes, but the angel was by his side, and because of that dear angel's presence, the step was never to be taken. Thus, gazing and meditating, the mother's face suddenly lighted up. She sank upon her knees beside her boy and in a fervent prayer dedicated him in a special manner to his angel. She besought Claude's invisible guide to protect her boy, and she promised in return to teach Claude love and devotion to his heavenly guardian. On the following day there befell an incident so strange and of such a nature as to convince Mrs. Lightfoot that her prayer had not been uttered in vain. Claude, carrying his arm in a sling, was skipping upon the sidewalk in front of his house, while Mr. Lightfoot, seated on the stoop, was glancing over the evening paper and breathing in gratefully the cooling lake breeze which had come like a benediction to dispel an unusually long period of hot weather. When Mr. Lightfoot presently raised his eyes from the paper, he discovered Claude endeavoring to mount a huge dog. The dog's head was bent close to the sidewalk. His tongue was protruding from foam-covered lips. He was moving along slowly, sullenly, paying no attention to the boy's movements. "Claude! Claude!" As Mr. Lightfoot spoke, the dog turned his head. There was a strange and forbidding look in his bloodshot eyes. Very much alarmed, Mr. Lightfoot sprang to his feet and threw open the hall door. "Claude!" he cried. "Come here at once!" Claude obeyed, and as he tripped laughingly to his father's side, a policeman, pistol in hand, turned the corner. "Mad dog!" shouted the policeman. On the instant, Mr. Lightfoot caught the child in his arms, sprang back into the hallway, and banged the door. As the door closed, the dog, with a savage growl, sprang up the steps, and his paws beat savagely against the panels. Then came 3 distinct pistol shots, and all was still. Even little Claude was brought to understand the peril into which he had been thrown, and the seemingly miraculous nature of his escape. From that hour dated his love for his angel, a love which shall last, I trust, to his dying day. Henceforth, Mrs. Lightfoot, though by no means utterly free from anxiety, possessed her soul, comparatively speaking, in peace. Without going further into Claude's early tumblings and bumpings and mischances, it is sufficient to say that the youngster always came forth without incurring serious harm. His angel, according to our way of looking at things, must have had a busy time of it, indeed. Enough has been said to lead to the inference that Claude, when it came to the making of a day's program which included himself, was a very uncertain factor. So then, Claude was to go fishing with his father, mother, and sister. Such was the plan. Mr. and Mrs. Lightfoot did no fishing that day, and Kate, at the present writing, has not caught a single fish yet. As for Claude, Part 2. The subject of this veracious narrative gazed out of the window, down upon the green, trim lawn which sloped to the lake. It was a tempting sight. What a glorious thing it would be to take a dash down the slope and across the lawn. However, there was a difficulty in the way. To leave the room according to the conventional manner, that is, through the doorway, Claude must needs pass through the chamber where his father was sleeping, and to disturb Mr. Lightfoot's rest was not to be thought of. Claude thrust his head out of the window, and to his manifest joy discovered, within easy reach, a lightning rod. Down this, without a moment's hesitation, the young gentleman effected a rapid descent, and quicker than thought rather, for Claude did no thinking till later in the day, he bounded off towards the lake as blithe as a robin that caroled in the neighboring grove. A dainty butterfly arrested his flying feet and brought his hat from his head in an unsuccessful attempt at its capture. With a characteristic prodigality in the way of carelessness, he left his hat behind him and sped after the gorgeous creature till a wee bird on a twig diverted his attention. It was a timid, fluttering, tiny thing, and the adventurer felt quite certain that he could catch it just as easy as nothing. For a good quarter of an hour he chased it steadily, and then, out of breath, realized that he had sadly underestimated the bird's strength of wing, and that, in consequence, further pursuit was useless. Claude now gazed about him. Hatless and out of breath, he was standing on a steamboat landing. One of his stockings was down, and there was a prominent rent in his shirt. Claude rather rejoiced in this rent. It revealed his first pair of suspenders, worn for the first time that very morning. Before he had quite made up his mind to go in search of his hat, his eye chanced to fall upon a pin. "See a pin and pick it up. All day you'll have good luck," muttered Claude. This little pin changed the fate of that day. As it lay in his hand, Claude gazed at it, then upon the waters. "Guess I'll go fishing before they are up," he murmured. He bent the pin and tied it to a string which he produced from out of the museum of odds and ends in his pocket. By way of a sinker, he took his gold ring off his finger and fastened it to the line. The ring had been given to him on his last birthday. A pole and a worm were easily secured by the enterprising youth, and in the time that it takes to narrate it, Claude was seated upon the pier, gleefully kicking his heels in the air while gazing hopefully at a bit of wood which bobbed upon the water in lieu of a floater. The spot which Claude had chanced upon afforded a good view of the lower lake, with its wooded shores, its stretches of lawn, its gay villas, and within clear range of Claude's fine eye-shot a summer hotel, gorgeous with flags, banners, and bunting, and standing out in the midst of most inviting pleasure ground. But it was the water which afforded the chief attraction to the fisher boy. So clear and calm and cooling did it look that he was sorely tempted to disrobe and plunge boldly in it. But there were two objections. First of all, Claude could not swim. Of this objection, it must be confessed, he made small account. He had been asked whether he could swim. He would have answered that he did not know. The second objection was that his mother had forbidden him to make any such attempt. Claude was obedient. "I wish I had a hook with a bit of a sticker at the end of it, like men use," said Claude, still kicking his legs. The cork just then gave a lurch, bobbed like a boy making an awkward attempt to stand on his head, sank back as though exhausted by the effort, then, with seeming new life, stood up straight for the smallest fraction of a second and disappeared. Claude gave his line a sharp tug, and his heart bounded exultingly as he felt the weight and struggle at the other end. "Ha-hi!" he screamed, jumping to his feet. He added immediately, "Oh, pshaw!" for the fish, with a single jerk, had slipped away while the pin flew high in air. Still, in the passing throes of disappointment, Claude chanced to observe upon a pile of shingles at his side a rusty nail. He seized it and, in a fit of prudence, removed his ring from the line to replace it by this less expensive sinker. So engrossed was Claude in making this change that he failed to notice the arrival of a man fully accoutred for a day's outing, holding in his hand a fine rod upon which glittered a silver reel. The approach towards the landing place of an ancient boatman with his boat brought Claude out of his fit of absorption. "Are you going fishing, sir?" Claude inquired of the gentleman, who appeared to be vexed. "Yes, sonny." "I am Claude, sir. Are you going right off?" "Why? Are you anxious to tie me?" "No, sir, but while you are waiting, you might lend me your fishing pole." "Upon my word!" ejaculated the sportsman. He added after a glance shoreward, "That boy of mine is so careless, the girl too, for that matter. They promised most solemnly not to keep me waiting 1 minute, and now it's later by an hour than the time we agreed upon for starting, and the best part of the fishing time is nearly over. What do you say, Jack?" turning to the boatman, "to our going out and fishing around here till they come?" "There is fine black bass right around this here place," remarked the man at the oars, "and it wouldn't hurt to try some trolling till the children come." "Oh, mister," pleaded Claude, "can't I go along with you? I want to catch a big fish." Not deigning to notice this appeal, the man stepped into the boat and, as he shoved it off, cried out, "Bobby, if my little boy and girl come along here, just tell them to wait till I get back. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "My name is Claude," returned the artless youth in his seriousness. The boat had not made many lengths when a boy and a girl, in the wildest excitement, came dashing across the lawn and down upon the pier. "Papa, Papa," screamed the boy, "you just come right back and take me." "Papa, Papa," sobbed the girl with tears, which happened to be genuine, rolling down her cheeks. For the father it was a tragic moment. He loved fishing. He idolized his children. The fishing was good. The children were bad. He had gone to great pains to try his luck early. The children had brought all his endeavors to nothing. They had kept him waiting. It was just that they should themselves wait. Besides, to return meant another loss of 10 or 12 minutes. The boatman rested on his oars, and the father, with a weak expression upon his face, addressed himself to his savage idols. "My sweet little titty-witties," he began, "listen." "I'll be bad, I will. Come back right off," bawled the son. "Come on now. You needn't talk." While the engaging youth was thus discouraging his father's attempt at oratory, the sister A spoiled child of 8 or 9 was screaming at the top of her voice with her shoulders drawn up to her ears. The boatman gazed on, open-mouthed. As for Claude, he was inexpressibly shocked. When the little girl had lost her breath, the father seized his chance. "Listen to me for one moment, my precious darlings." "You come on and bring that boat here," suggested the son in a roar. "Silence, sir!" cried the unhappy parent, goaded into an exhibition of authority by his son's extravagant impertinence. The boy started. The girl turned pale. It was their turn to be astonished. "You stay there on the pier till I come back for you. You have disobeyed me, you have broken your word, and you have been impudent. Pull away, boatman." With perplexed and lengthening faces, the dutiful children watched the receding boat till it disappeared behind a point of land. When at once their energies returned, the girl raised her shoulders and renewed her screaming, while her brother, with an ear-piercing howl, threw himself upon the pier, where he kicked and rolled in a seeming frenzy. In the wild abandon of his contortions, he happened to kick Claude. It was now Claude's turn to be angry. With flashing eyes, he caught his unwitting aggressor by the collar and held him fast. "Stop!" roared the reckless kicker. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," bawled Claude. "Let go, will you? I didn't mean to kick you. Let go, I say." "I don't mind your kicking me so much, but you oughtn't to carry on that way before your papa. He's your boss, you know. How do you expect to get to heaven, anyhow? I've a notion to stick your head in the water. There, now, I'll let you loose." With her shoulders still close to her ears, the girl had watched the scene in amazed silence. As for the brother, the idea that he, Charlie Sherlock, the son of Considine Sherlock, a leading businessman of Chicago, should be asked by an ordinary boy how he expected to go to heaven. Charlie Sherlock looked lakewards to assure himself that his father was not within sight. Satisfied with his survey, he made a careful examination of the pier. He found, in place of a chip, a partially burnt match, which he put on his right shoulder. "Say, Johnny," he said, stepping up to Claude, "you just knock that chip off my shoulder." "My name is Claude." "I don't care what your name is. You just go on and knock that chip off my shoulder." "It's a match," Claude remarked. "Are you going to knock that chip off my shoulder or not?" "Is your mama well?" Claude inquired as he turned his back from Charlie in order to watch his cork. "None of your business," snapped Charlie. "I guess you're the only boy," Claude went on affably. "And I suppose that girl over there is your sister?" A word of explanation will account for Claude's manner of dealing with Charlie. Only the week before, Mr. Lightfoot had called him to task for quarreling. "But I can't help it, Pa," he said. "When fellows come up and want to lick me, what am I to do?" "Talk about something else," answered the father. "It's a sure way of avoiding a fight." This instruction Claude was now faithfully carrying out. His challenger, in the present instance, was astonished. "See here, Johnny. I told you once my name is Claude. What's your name?" "You needn't go talking about my family. My father's a banker. You haven't been introduced, and you've no right to go talking that way. You're a coward, anyway. Say, aren't you going to knock that chip off?" "Shh!" cried Claude, jumping to his feet. "I've got a bite." Charlie was diverted by the new interest. The chip fell from his shoulder as he rushed to Claude's side and gazed eagerly at the twitching float. "Why don't you pull in?" he queried. "Shh!" said Claude. The float disappeared as he spoke, and Claude, with a jerk, raised high in air a fine fat perch. "Whoop! Ha-hay!" he screamed, dancing about the pier and waving his fish in Charlie's face. "Keep that fish away from me!" cried Charlie, jumping back as though the fish had been a snake. For answer, Claude broke out into his jolliest laugh, and again dangled the perch in Charlie's face. "I'll smash your head for you," threatened Charlie. Again Claude laughed, Again he pursued the retreating lad with the fish. The perch at this moment slipped off the hook, and Claude at once hopped over after it and stooped to pick it up. While in this position he received a smart blow in the ear. Claude was up in an instant, and the process of hopping and brandishing his fist that he went through would have astonished a company of acrobats. It certainly produced a surprise in the person most interested, who, before he had fairly realized that Claude had arisen, received a dozen stout body blows and what promised to develop into a black eye. "I take it back!" he screamed as the tears rolled down his face. As Claude forthwith suspended his war dance and again stooped to pick up his perch, there came a giggle from the girl. "You shut up, Celia," said the boy angrily. "Shut up yourself," came the ladylike reply to this most ungentlemanlike bit of advice. "It served you right. You shouldn't have struck him when he wasn't looking." "I'll slap you over," bellowed the amiable brother. "If you do," said Claude, now thoroughly angered, "I'll run this perch down your throat." Claude was a knight. He was thinking of his own sister as he spoke. "She's only my sister," explained Charlie apologetically. For fully 30 seconds there was no sunshine on Claude's face, but he said nothing. Turning in disgust, both from Claude and from her, who was only his sister, Charlie perched himself on the railing which guarded one side of the pier. Presently his father's boat hove in sight, turning the point. Charlie uttered a yell of triumph and made a quick movement. The rail was old and frail. There was a piercing shriek from the girl, a cry of agony from Mr. Sherlock, and Claude was dancing about like one possessed. Charlie, with a great splash, had tumbled into 6 feet of water. "Can you swim?" bawled Claude as Charlie came to the surface. By way of answer, the head disappeared. Part 3. "Save my boy!" came an imploring voice from the boat. Mr. Sherlock was standing in the stern and waving his arms wildly, while the boatman rowed toward the drowning boy with all his strength. "Save my brother!" cried the girl, who as she spoke caught Claude by the arm. "Let go, will you?" piped Claude, shaking off the sister with the rudeness born of the excitement, and then, placing a hand upon the railing, the little lad bounded over it into the water. Claude, for all he was so reckless, had measured his distance carefully. He had dropped within easy reach of one of the pier's supports, and as he rose like a cork to the surface, he caught the post in one hand, and reached out the other in the direction where Charlie had gone under. Nor was he a moment too soon. His hand, as it went out, was grasped tightly by the drowning boy, who at once began to kick with such violence that Claude was within a little of losing his hold. But although the rescuer succeeded in maintaining his clasp, he found it impossible to keep Charlie's head above water. "Girl," he panted, "shove over that pack of shingles, quick!" Celia obeyed with alacrity. With a great effort she pushed the shingles over the pier. Claude now did a very bold thing. He wished to put the pack of shingles under Charlie's head, but as one hand was employed in clinging to the wooden support, and the other in holding Charlie, the project seemed impossible of fulfillment. Here Claude's daring and inventiveness both came into play. With a slight spring forward, he released his hold of the post, but only to catch it with his feet while in the act of springing. Claude was even then a practiced gymnast. He was already a past master in the art of hanging by his toes and heels. He was now applying his athletics to a practical purpose. This daring move, in its first consequences, promised disaster. While Claude's feet and knees remained in the air, his head went under water. And the little girl, thinking that all was lost, fell upon her knees. To make matters worse, one of the 2 oars, which were being put to such severe use by the old fisherman, snapped under the unusual strain. But in this dark moment a little hand came to the surface, groped about, and finally rested upon the pack of shingles. and forthwith up came Claude's head. With a quickness, dexterity, and coolness wonderful in a lad of his years, Claude brought the shingles over to Charlie's head, and with another movement, which again submerged him, succeeded in placing Charlie's head upon the support. Charlie was now unconscious. "Hurry up with that boat," panted Claude. "There's a nail or something sticking into my leg." "For God's sake, hold him tight," cried Mr. Sherlock. "We'll be there in a moment." But it was a long moment. The boat was 100 feet away, and under the propulsion of but one oar, advanced slowly. Claude felt that he could hold out no longer, and he breathed a rapid prayer to his guardian angel. "Girl," he suddenly said, "lie down on the pier and catch hold of my feet." Celia again obeyed. Throwing herself prone, she reached forward and caught the locked shoes of the rescuer. "Can you hold 'em tight?" "I think so." "Then we're all right," said Claude. "I was nearly gone. There was a whole lot of water ran down my throat, and I got tired. Say, hurry up with that boat." The boat was now approaching an extraordinary tableau. A little girl lying upon a pier, and holding tightly a lad by the feet, the small boy with forehead and nose above water supporting an unconscious head upon a pack of shingles while beating the water with his free hand after the instinct of a natural swimmer. At last the boat reached them. The rescue was easy, and Claude, little the worse for his bath, was presently dancing the water out of his clothes upon the eventful pier. Charlie was almost immediately restored to consciousness. He signalized his restoration by a whine which, as he gathered strength, developed into a dismal howl. The boatman and the father and the sister were all absorbed in attentions to Charlie. They had at length succeeded in persuading that interesting young person to cease howling when Claude stepped over to the group. "Mister," he said, "do you intend using that boat just now?" It was on the card for Mr. Sherlock to step forward, seize Claude's hands, and exclaim in trembling tones, "My dear boy, you have saved my son's life." He did nothing of the sort. He turned his head slightly and said, "No, take it if you want it. By the way, I'm ever so much obliged to you." "And don't you need your fishing line and your minis?" "No. You may take the whole affair. I must attend to my boy. He must be put to bed at once." "Thank you, sir. And where shall I leave the boat when I am done with it?" "Can you row?" "That's easy," said Claude lightly. "Bring it back here, then." "All right." In a state of wild exhilaration, Claude hopped into the boat. He was about to push off when the little girl ran over and caught his hand. "Oh, thank you for saving my brother. You're a brave boy." "That was nothing," said Claude simply. He added with a touch of pride, "Oh, but you ought to see me bend the crab. Hanging by the feet is nothing to it." As Claude paddled away, his new friends bore landwards the sobbing Charlie. Claude pulled out some 200-odd feet from shore, cast anchor, baited his hook with a reel minnie, and having solved a few mysteries of the reel, seated himself in the stern of the boat. Suddenly he jumped to his feet, saving himself from toppling over through a seeming miracle. "Oh, good gracious, I clean forgot." Just at this moment he remembered that today was his 11th birthday, and that his parents must be wondering as to his whereabouts. Whether to return at once or not, that was the question. Was it his duty? Would he be disobedient if he were to remain here just for a few minutes? It was glorious to be on the water. And just think of catching a big fish with no grown person around to help the catching. There wasn't a single grown person in sight. Yes, there was. As Claude glanced around, he saw a boat turning the cape. Well, they were not in his boat anyhow. Again there were twinges of conscience. Again Claude hesitated. "I'll just think it out," he said, as the strange boat cast anchor a rod or so above him. "And while I'm thinking, perhaps some old fish will give me a bite." Thus compromising with his conscience, he did actually try to think it out. 1 minute went by, and then the second was decided in so strange, in so unbelievable a manner, by an adventure so odd, that I almost fear to put it down, lest some readers may think that I exaggerate. Part 4. The boat which anchored near Claude was occupied by 2 gentlemen, one of them in the 30s, the other fairly advanced in middle life. "Bob," the younger remarked, "that's an interesting study over there." "What?" asked Bob as he stooped down to light a cigar. "That boy. The American boy holds the world's record for independence. That little chap, alone in that boat, with a pole in his hands, as big as himself, is hopping about as though he had lived in a boat all his life. I've a notion, Bob, to bring an American boy into my next novel." "Don't talk shop, Howard," growled his companion. "I went to sleep over your novels regularly all last winter. Perhaps, however, they wouldn't be so sleepy if you were to bring in a real American boy. If you got him in at all, you'd liven up things a little." "Much obliged to you for your suggestion and your kindly words of encouragement," responded Howard Alcott, an English novelist of some promise. "That boy would suit me admirably. What a free-limbed, sparkling, sunny-faced lad he is! He has the spring of the tiger and the erectness of the lion. The sun is in his locks and the sunset in his cheeks." "You needn't practice on me with your pretty words." "I hope he is able to swim, though." "Why?" asked Bob. "Because he's bound to fall out of the boat. He's playing wiggle-waggle. If I read the youngster aright, he'll begin to practice hopscotch or a hop-step and a jump in that boat before 10 minutes are up. Lo, he's over shore. No, he isn't. Good heavens, what a jumping jack he is!" For at this moment Claude's line, to the tune of the reels clicking, had run out, and Claude, in springing forward, had stumbled over one of the seats, and by an unspeakable twist had just escaped flopping over into the water. He was upon his feet at once, still grasping the pole, and then there came a yell of boyish triumph. "Whoop-la! Hurrah!" He then ceased shouting in order to pay full attention to his mysterious reel. He saw at once that the reel required special study, which, under the circumstances, he could then hardly give it. So, dropping the pole in the boat, he grasped the line. In the meantime, the reel had gone clicking steadily, and the fish had run off to a considerable distance with the hook. As he caught the line, he gave it a jerk into which he put all his strength. Claude was a happy Hercules. That jerk fixed the hook firmly in the fish. "Why, the boy is a fool," roared the distinguished author. "He'll be over the side of the boat in 10 seconds. If the fish runs on him and allows the line to slacken. Hey, boy, look out! Stand up straight!" Claude's next step had indeed been foolish. Standing in the center of the boat and putting one foot on the gunwale nearest the fish, he threw himself back so that the whole weight of his body was supported by the line and the fish's resistance. Then he set about hauling in, hand over hand. The author had some grounds for his alarm. He had scarcely shouted out his warning when the fish, impatient of the tugging at his jaws, turned in his course, and with a magnificent leap that disclosed to the onlookers a large pike, shot down into the water and straight towards his captor. At once the line began slack, and lo, Claude took a back somersault into the water. But he still grasped his line firmly. "Bob! Bob!" screamed Howard. "Up with the anchor quick, or there will be a drowning." As he spoke, he caught up the oars. Claude went down with a great splash. The scene that followed is beyond description. Claude's impetus sent him down some 5 or 6 feet to the bottom. He still grasped the line tightly, and the fish was on the other side of the boat. Thus the line, which held at one end a powerful pike, was grasped at the other by a lad who, though strong enough on shore, was a baby on the water. The line itself, as it happened, passed just over the center of the boat. The great splash which signalized Claude's disappearance was almost simultaneously followed by another splash on the other side of the boat, for the pike, jerked by Claude's weight and the impetus of his involuntary dive, shot up full 5 feet in the air. There never was a pike so thoroughly alarmed since fishes began to bite. When Claude touched bottom, you may be sure he was anxious to regain the surface, and he leaped from the bed of the lake with such a leap as became Claude Lightfoot. The fish, on the other hand, was just as anxious to reach bottom as Claude was to gain the surface. So, as Claude made a spring, the pike shot down with winged speed, and then Claude flew skywards, kicking his little legs frantically, and as he rose into the air, at least 5 feet, says the distinguished author, he afforded a spectacle as extraordinary as anything recorded in the annals of fishing. He came down still kicking, and disappeared again. "Good heavens!" exclaimed the author. "It takes an American boy to get up new ideas. Think of a game of seesaw between a pike and a small boy." And then Mr. Alcott put an end to his wonderful game of seesaw by catching Claude's locks in a firm grasp. "The fish! The fish!" spluttered Claude. "Look out for my fish!" "You're holding the line. Keep on holding it," answered Mr. Alcott, as he cautiously raised the kicking youth and hauled him, assisted by his companion, into their boat. Claude, you may be sure, did hold on, and resuming his hopping, much to the nervous terror of Bob and the delight of Mr. Alcott, he hauled the alarmed and thoroughly exhausted fish up to the gunwale, whereupon Mr. Alcott clasped it firmly about the head and safely landed the finest catch of that season. "There's an incident and a character for your next story," remarked Bob. "The character is all very well," remarked the author, "but I dare not handle the incident. Nobody would believe it. The taste of the day goes in for realism." Claude was still dancing about his prize when a third boat rounded the cape. "Oh, goodness!" gasped Claude. "Here's my father, and I'll bet he's looking for me." After the interchange of some civilities and a few hurried questions, Mr. Lightfoot turned to his son. "Tell me your story, Claude." "Well, you see, Pa, I got up early and climbed down the lightning rod. I tried to catch an old bird and forgot everything. When I got through chasing that old bird, I was at a good place for fishing. Then a man came along in a boat to take out his boy and girl. While the man was fishing, the boy fell into the water, and I helped to fish him out. I caught a dandy perch, too, but he's nothing to this fellow. Just look at his mouth. It's like a cave." "Go on with your story, sir." "Well, then I asked the man for the loan of his boat, and he let me have it. That's the boat, half full of water. And then, when I got here, I got a big fish." "And nearly drowned yourself catching it," remarked Bob. "No, I didn't, sir. It wasn't so deep there. Why, I touched bottom easily." "Claude, do you know what you deserve?" asked Mr. Lightfoot. "A whipping, Pa," answered Claude, sad but honest. He brightened up as he added, "But it's a great fish." "Howard," said Bob, "by all means put that boy in your next book. It's good to have one honest character in 3 volumes. "Thanks awfully," laughed the author. Then Claude the Thoughtless returned with his father. He spent the rest of the day on shore, and if he did not get what he himself acknowledged he had deserved, it was in consideration of the fact that it was his 11th birthday. End of New Faces and Old Short Stories by Francis J. Finn, S.J.